Speak! Who sent you to steal it? Billionaire Thomas Whitaker thundered, his voice cutting through the glass-walled boardroom. Annie Carter froze in front of him, both hands locked around the black folder she had been told to deliver. For one terrible second, she did not understand what he meant. "Sir," Annie whispered, her voice shaking, "is there some kind of mistake?" Thomas's eyes hardened. "Mistake? You are holding the evidence in your hands, and you still dare call it a mistake?" Annie looked down. The folder suddenly felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. Heavier than grocery bags, heavier than hospital bills, heavier than the old backpack digging into her shoulder every morning on the bus. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. "I don't know." Thomas cut her off. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Why is my sealed file in your hands?" No answer came. Not because Annie had none in her heart, but because fear had stolen the words from her mouth. Then somehow, through the tightness in her chest, she forced herself to speak. "Please believe me," Annie said, her voice barely holding together. "I don't know anything. I was called. I never imagined you could do something this terrible." Eleanor Whitaker cut in. Her voice was not loud, but it landed hard. Annie turned toward her. "Mrs. Whitaker, you told me to." Eleanor raised one hand, stopping her as if Annie were a child speaking out of turn. "Do not make this worse by lying." The room tightened around those words. Eleanor looked at Thomas, then at the board members, allowing silence to do part of the work for her. "This," she said, "is exactly why people like her can only ever be temporary staff." Annie felt the sentence strike deeper than the accusation itself. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice trembling but clearer now. "And there was nothing for me to steal. Please believe me." She gave it to me. For the first time, Eleanor's expression flickered, but only for a breath. Thomas stepped closer, his face stern, his anger held tight behind his eyes. "I only want to know why an employee like you is here, standing in this boardroom, holding this file. Answer me." Annie turned toward him, gripping the folder so tightly her knuckles ached. "I was told to get documents, coffee, printed copies, and signing pens," she said. "I was only following orders." Eleanor's mouth curved slightly. "Whose orders?" "You keep saying my orders. But did anyone hear me? Did anyone see me?" Annie's lips parted, but no sound came. Eleanor took one slow step forward, her voice smooth enough to sound reasonable and cruel enough to bruise. "You don't know anything, yet you were standing outside the chairman's private office with a confidential file in your hands. Do you think everyone in this room is stupid?" Annie felt her eyes burn. "I'm only telling the truth." "The truth?" Eleanor repeated, almost gently. "The truth is your mother is sick. The truth is there are unpaid bills. And the truth is desperate people often do desperate things." Annie lifted her head, her voice catching in her throat. "Please don't bring my mother into this." For a moment, no one spoke. Not Thomas, not the board members, not the assistant standing stiffly near the glass wall. She forced herself to look at Thomas again. "Please check the cameras." Eleanor gave a small, dry laugh. "The hallway cameras were under maintenance this afternoon." "Explain that." "The cameras went dark. The file disappeared from the safe. You appeared outside Ethan's office, and the documents ended up in your hands." She tilted her head, letting each fact fall like a nail into wood. "Do you want us to believe all of that was just a coincidence?" Annie's fingers tightened around the folder. Ethan was Thomas's private legal advisor, and his office sat only 2 doors down from the chairman's suite. Annie had been sent there once that afternoon to drop off blue envelopes. She had not asked why. Temporary workers did not ask why. Thomas turned toward the security director standing near the door. "Were the hallway cameras really down?" The man cleared his throat. "Maintenance ticket was logged this morning, sir. Executive corridor, west side. Partial outage." Eleanor folded her hands in front of her. "Convenient, isn't it?" Annie shook her head. "I didn't know anything about cameras. I don't even know where they are controlled from." "No," Eleanor said softly, "but someone like you would know how to follow instructions from whoever sent you." That sentence changed the room. It gave people a story they could understand. A young temporary worker, short on money, used by someone outside the company to steal a sealed file before the biggest meeting of the year. It was clean. It was simple. It was wrong. Thomas looked back at Annie. "Who called you to this floor? If you tell me who showed you how to steal it," Thomas said, his voice lower now. "I won't make this bigger than it has to be." Annie swallowed. "Mrs. Whitaker did." Eleanor's eyebrows lifted. "Again with that. She gave me a list." "Where is it?" Annie's stomach dropped. The paper list was folded in the pocket of her cardigan. Or at least she hoped it was. Her hands shook so badly she could barely move them. She shifted the folder under one arm and searched her pocket. Nothing. The other pocket. Nothing. Eleanor watched her with quiet satisfaction. "I had it," Annie whispered. "Of course you did," Eleanor said. Thomas held out his hand. The folder. Annie gave it to him because refusing would make her look guiltier. The moment it left her hands, she felt both relief and terror. Relief because the thing accusing her was no longer touching her. Terror because now she had nothing to hold on to. Thomas examined the seal across the folder. It had been broken. His face darkened. "This file was locked in my private safe," he said. "Only 4 people had authorized knowledge of it." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "And now a temporary support employee is carrying it into the boardroom." Annie wanted to say again that she had been told to bring it. She wanted to say Eleanor had stopped her outside the office, pressed the folder into her arms, and said Mr. Whitaker needed it immediately. She wanted to say she had been too afraid to question a woman whose last name was on the building, but every sentence sounded weak before it left her mouth. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and Annie saw something worse than anger in his eyes. Disappointment, not personal disappointment, because he did not know her. That was what hurt most. He was disappointed in the version of her he had accepted in a matter of minutes. "Security," he said. A tall man near the door stepped forward. Annie's breath caught. "Sir, please." Thomas did not raise his voice this time. "You will remain on this floor until we understand what happened. No phone calls. No leaving the building. No contact with anyone outside this room." Eleanor's face remained composed, but Annie noticed the small relaxation in her shoulders. A person relieved before justice had even begun. Annie looked around the boardroom. Not one person met her eyes for long. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked annoyed by the interruption. Some looked at her as if she had brought dirt onto their polished floor. Then Mr. Harris's voice echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the glass wall. "Miss Annie?" Everyone turned. He stood in the hallway, holding a stack of printouts, his gray eyebrows drawn together. He had probably come looking for the labels she never returned to finish. His eyes moved from Thomas to Eleanor, then to Annie's pale face. "What's going on here?" he asked. Eleanor's expression cooled. "This is a private executive matter." Mr. Harris did not move. "That girl looks scared." Thomas turned slightly. "Mr. Harris, this does not concern you." "With respect, sir," the old man said. "When a young lady who works under this roof is standing there shaking like that, it concerns somebody." Annie felt tears press harder behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry, not here, not while Eleanor was watching. Thomas studied Mr. Harris, then looked back at Annie. "Take her to the security conference room." The guard touched Annie's elbow, not roughly, but enough to remind her she had no choice. As she stepped out of the boardroom, she passed Eleanor. The woman leaned just close enough for Annie alone to hear. "You should have stayed invisible." Annie stopped for half a second. Then she kept walking, because sometimes dignity is not a speech. Sometimes it is simply refusing to fall apart in front of the person trying to break you. "Everything appears to be here," Ethan Cole said quietly. "But if this file was accessed, copied, or photographed, the damage may already be done." Eleanor stood near the end of the table, composed again, her hands resting on the back of a chair. "Thomas, we need to inform Northbridge before rumors reach them. If they hear the sealed file was stolen from anyone else, we look careless." "We do not know it was stolen by her," Mr. Harris said. Every face turned. He stood near the door with the stack of printouts still under one arm. Eleanor looked at him as though a chair had started speaking. "Mr. Harris, with all respect, this is above facilities." "With all respect, ma'am," he said. "Truth is not above anybody." A few people shifted. Thomas looked at him longer than expected. "You said you were looking for Annie." "Yes, sir. She was helping me in the copy room earlier. Printer jammed so bad it sounded like a lawnmower eating gravel. She got down on her knees and pulled the tray apart before I could find my glasses. Eleanor's voice stayed smooth. Earlier is not now. No, ma'am, but it matters when you start saying where a person was all afternoon. Eleanor turned to Ethan. Do you hear this? She prepared every step. She made sure she appeared in multiple places to confuse the timeline. She even has an older employee ready to speak for her. Too perfect for someone who claims she only accidentally held the wrong envelope. Annie's throat tightened. Why are you doing this to me? I've always done my part of the job right, even when I had to do so many extra things no one else wanted to do. I tried not to draw attention. I tried to stay quiet. So why are you still blaming me? If Annie's courage touched your heart, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring stories like this. Eleanor looked at her directly then, and for the first time her polished sadness slipped. Your job is to be quiet and follow orders, she said. Not stand here playing the victim. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You just said her job is to be quiet? Eleanor paused. She realized she had spoken too quickly. I mean, temporary employees should not argue in a serious situation, she said, recovering her tone, especially when the evidence is in their hands. Thomas turned to Brooks, who had returned from escorting Annie. Start a timeline. Every place she was seen, every person who spoke with her, every camera that is working, not just the executive corridor. Eleanor's fingers tightened once on the chair back. It was so quick most people missed it. Thomas did not. Of course, Ethan said. I'll have it pull the logs. The corridor cameras were under maintenance, Eleanor reminded them. Thomas looked at her. Then we checked the ones that were not. A small silence followed. Eleanor smiled as if she approved. Naturally. In the security room, Annie heard footsteps. The door opened, and a woman from Human Resources stepped in with a legal pad. Her name was Patricia Lyle, close to 60, with reading glasses on a chain and a tired mouth that suggested she had seen too many workplace disasters disguised as misunderstandings. Annie, she said, sitting across from her, I'm going to ask some questions. You answer clearly. Don't guess. Don't fill silence. Just tell me what happened. Annie nodded. Yes, ma'am. Who first gave you instructions today regarding the executive floor? Mrs. Alvarez gave me visitor packets in the morning. Later, Mrs. Whitaker gave me a list. What list? A paper list. It said to print documents, take blue envelopes to legal, bring guest binders upstairs, get signing pens, and come to Mr. Whitaker's office. Where is that list now? Annie's face tightened. I don't know. I had it in my cardigan pocket. When I checked, it was gone. Patricia wrote that down without changing expression. Did Mrs. Whitaker hand you the sealed folder? Yes, ma'am. Where? Near Mr. Whitaker's office. She came out fast. She said he needed it immediately and told me to bring it to the boardroom. Did you see her come from inside his office? Annie hesitated, not because she was unsure, but because the truth sounded dangerous. I saw her near the door. It was closing behind her. Patricia looked up. You are certain? Yes, ma'am. Did she have a key card? I don't know. I only saw her hand on the folder. Patricia stopped writing. Annie, do you understand the seriousness of what you're saying? Annie looked at the older woman. I understand the seriousness of what she's saying about me. For the first time, Patricia's face softened, but only slightly. Fair enough. Back in the boardroom, IT manager Caleb Ross arrived with a laptop under one arm and the uncomfortable speed of a man summoned by a billionaire during a crisis. He connected to the wall screen and began pulling access logs. Executive corridor camera outage began at 2:31 p.m. and ended at 2:49, Caleb said. Maintenance ticket? Thomas asked. Logged at 9:08 this morning. By whom? Caleb clicked. His brow tightened. It appears to have been entered under general admin credentials. Ethan leaned forward. That's too broad. I know, Caleb said. I'm checking the workstation. Eleanor sighed. While we chase computer shadows. Northbridge is waiting. Thomas did not look at her. Let them wait. That was the first time Eleanor's expression truly changed. A small crack, quickly repaired. Mr. Harris stepped closer to the screen. Can you pull the copy room camera? Caleb glanced at Thomas, who nodded. The screen changed to a grainy view of the copy room. Timestamp. 2:33 p.m. Annie appeared beside Mr. Harris, kneeling near the printer, sleeves pushed to her elbows, pulling open the lower tray. Another employee, a young man from mail services, stood beside them holding a stack of labels. At 2:36, Annie laughed at something Mr. Harris said. At 2:38, she wiped toner from her fingers with a paper towel. Thomas stared at the screen. Eleanor said nothing. Caleb checked another feed. Second floor legal corridor, 2:42 p.m. She drops off blue envelopes at Ethan's office reception. Then she leaves. Ethan nodded slowly. My assistant signed for those. Thomas's eyes narrowed. And my office? Caleb pulled up the executive corridor feed. The screen showed static, then black. Outage, Caleb said. At the exact window the file left my safe, Thomas said. Eleanor found her voice, which still does not explain how Annie ended up holding it. Mr. Harris turned toward her. No, ma'am. But it does explain she could not have been in two places at once. Another silence settled, heavier than the first. Thomas closed the folder. His anger had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer aimed in a straight line. Bring Annie back in. Eleanor looked sharply at him. Thomas, be careful. A frightened employee will say whatever protects her. And a guilty person, Thomas said, finally meeting his sister's eyes, will count on us believing that. The words did not accuse her outright, but they landed close enough. In the security room, Patricia stood just as Brooks opened the door. Annie, Brooks said, Mr. Whitaker wants you back in the boardroom. Annie rose slowly. Her legs felt weak, but she steadied herself against the table before anyone could reach for her. She would not be carried into that room like someone already defeated. He only gave her a small nod, the kind older people give when they cannot fix the whole world, but can still stand on the right side of a narrow hallway. Annie nodded back. Then she walked toward the boardroom again. Not cleared, not safe, not believed yet, but no longer completely alone. Annie stepped back into the boardroom with Mr. Harris a few paces behind her. The room felt different now. Not kinder, not safe, but less certain. A few minutes earlier, every face had seemed fixed in judgment. Now, some of those same faces watched the wall screen, where the frozen image of Annie in the copy room still showed her kneeling beside the jammed printer at 2:33 p.m., far from Thomas Whitaker's office. Thomas stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the sealed folder. Annie, he said, his voice lower than before. I need you to tell us again, from the beginning, what happened after Mrs. Whitaker gave you the list. Annie looked once at Eleanor. The older woman stood still, chin lifted, calm in the way rich people were calm when they believed the room belonged to them. Annie wanted to look away, but she didn't. She told me to print documents, take blue envelopes to legal, bring guest binders upstairs, get signing pens, and come to your office. Did she say why? No, sir. Did you ask? Annie shook her head. No, sir. I was temporary staff. I didn't think I was supposed to ask. Mr. Harris made a low sound in his throat, not quite a cough. Thomas heard it. So did Eleanor. Ethan Cole turned toward Annie. When you reached my office reception, what time was it? Close to 2:42. Your assistant signed for the envelopes. Ethan nodded to Caleb Ross. Pull reception log. Caleb typed quickly. The wall screen changed. A digital sign-in record appeared beside another camera still. Annie stood at Ethan's reception desk, holding blue envelopes. Timestamp, 2:42 minuti 16 secondi p.m. That confirms delivery, Caleb said. Thomas looked at Annie. After that, I went back toward the executive corridor because Mrs. Whitaker said I needed to get signing pens and then come to your office. Eleanor interrupted softly. That is what she claims. Thomas did not look at her. Let her finish. The words were simple, but they steadied Annie more than he knew. She continued. I got the pens from the supply cabinet near the small conference room. Then I saw Mrs. Whitaker near your office. She had the black folder. She seemed upset and told me you needed it in the boardroom right away. I took it because she told me to. Eleanor gave a quiet laugh. Thomas, listen to how convenient that sounds. I supposedly walk out of your office with the most sensitive file in the company and hand it to the lowest-ranking person on the floor? Mr. Harris looked at her. Sometimes folks choose the lowest-ranking person because they think nobody will believe them. The room went quiet. Eleanor turned to him slowly. You have been very eager to involve yourself today. I'm old, he said, not blind. Thomas's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Caleb cleared his throat. There's something else, the IT manager said. Every head turned toward him. Caleb kept his eyes on the laptop. The maintenance ticket that disabled the West Executive Corridor cameras was entered at 9:08 this morning, but the actual camera outage didn't begin until 2:31. That means someone scheduled the outage window in advance. Ethan leaned forward. Can general admin credentials do that? Yes, but the system records the workstation ID. I traced it to an executive assistant terminal that hasn't been assigned in 6 months. Thomas frowned. Whose terminal? Caleb hesitated. Former assistant to Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker. Eleanor's expression did not change, but the pearl necklace at her throat shifted as she swallowed. That terminal was decommissioned, she said. Half the administrative staff had access before it was removed. Was it removed? Thomas asked. Caleb clicked again. Disabled, not physically removed. It's in storage near the old records room. Ethan looked at Thomas. That area requires badge access. Thomas turned to Caleb. Pull access logs for the records room. Eleanor stepped forward. Thomas. This is absurd. You are letting a frightened girl and a facilities man drag your sister into an investigation because of an old computer terminal? No, Thomas said. I'm following evidence. That evidence is circumstantial. So was the folder in Annie's hands, Mr. Harris said. Eleanor's eyes flashed. No one asked you? No, ma'am. But somebody should have. Patricia Lyle entered then, legal pad pressed to her chest. She glanced at Annie, then Thomas. I have Annie's statement. It is consistent with what she said earlier. She also mentioned a written task list from Mrs. Whitaker, but she cannot locate it. Eleanor folded her arms. Because it does not exist. Annie lowered her eyes. She remembered folding the list into her cardigan pocket, remembered checking for it, and finding nothing. The loss felt like a small betrayal by her own hands. Patricia looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Whitaker, did you give Annie any written instructions today? No. Any verbal instructions? I may have asked her to handle routine support tasks. Coffee. Printing. Nothing involving Thomas's office. Annie looked up. That's not true. Eleanor turned on her. You should be careful. Annie's voice came out soft but steady. So should you. For the first time, something like surprise moved through the room. Thomas looked at Annie as if he had just noticed she was not only scared, she was tired of being scared. Caleb spoke again. Records room access log is up. The screen changed. Lines of badge entries appeared. Caleb scrolled to the afternoon. At 2:18 p.m., badge access granted to Margaret Hale. Ethan blinked. Margaret Hale? She resigned last year. Thomas's face hardened. Why is her badge active? Caleb's fingers moved faster. It shouldn't be. Eleanor shook her head. Old badges glitch all the time. No, ma'am, Caleb said carefully. They don't usually walk into record storage. Mr. Harris looked at Thomas. And they don't schedule camera outages by themselves, either. Ethan said, Can we see hallway footage outside records? Caleb pulled a feed from the lower administrative level. The angle was wide and grainy, but clear enough. At 2:17 p.m., a woman in a cream suit and sunglasses moved through the hall with a leather folder under one arm. She kept her face angled away from the camera, but no one in the room needed a perfect view. Annie stopped breathing. Eleanor said, That could be anyone. Thomas did not answer. His eyes stayed on the screen. Caleb advanced the footage. The woman reached the records room door, swiped a badge, stepped inside, and emerged 3 minutes later holding something small. A key card. Ethan looked down at the access report. Margaret Hale's old badge. Thomas turned slowly toward his sister. Eleanor. She lifted her chin. I went to records. That is not a crime. You said you had nothing to do with the old terminal. I did not say that. I said this line of questioning is absurd. No, Thomas said. Quieter now. You said old badges glitch. The room held its breath. Eleanor looked around, then gave a short laugh. Are we really doing this? Are we really putting my reputation beside hers? She pointed at Annie without looking at her. Thomas, look at her. She needed money. She was in the wrong place. She had the file. Why are you making this complicated? Annie felt those words pass through the room like cold air. Look at her. As if her worn shoes and temporary badge were evidence. As if hardship itself were fingerprints. Thomas's face changed then. Not fully. Not enough to be apology. But enough for Annie to see doubt taking root. He turned to Caleb. Find the footage between the records room and my office. Caleb nodded, but his mouth tightened. Some of that route crosses the outage zone. Find what does not. Minutes passed. No one sat comfortably. Someone's phone buzzed and was silenced. Outside, the city kept moving beyond the glass, unaware that a young woman's future balanced on camera angles and timestamps. Then Caleb froze. There. On the screen, a reflection appeared in the mirrored wall near the executive elevator. Not direct footage, only a partial reflection from the polished surface across the hall. A cream sleeve. A black folder. A hand pressing something against a keypad. Ethan whispered, "That's outside Thomas's office." Thomas stared at the image. "Can you sharpen it?" "I can try, but not much." Eleanor's voice cut in. "This is nonsense. Reflections? Shadows?" Meanwhile, the girl admitted she carried the folder. Annie looked at Thomas. "Because she gave it to me." This time, her voice did not break. Thomas turned from the screen to Annie, then to Eleanor. For the first time since the accusation began, he did not seem to be asking whether Annie was lying. He seemed to be asking why his sister needed her to be. "Caleb," he said, "preserve every feed. Ethan, notify Northbridge there is an internal security delay, not a breach confirmation. Patricia, keep Annie here as a witness, not a suspect." Eleanor's face tightened. "Thomas," he looked at her, "and disable every legacy badge in this building now." Annie closed her eyes for half a second. Witness. Not suspect. It was not freedom, not yet. But it was the first word that did not feel like a cage. Mr. Harris stepped beside her and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "Stand steady, Miss Annie. Truth has legs. Might walk slow, but it gets there." Annie nodded, holding herself upright as the room shifted around her. Across the table, Eleanor Whitaker looked at the screen, then at Thomas, then at Annie. Her face was still elegant, still controlled, but Annie saw it now. Not confidence, calculation, and that frightened her more than the accusation, because a cornered, powerful person rarely chose silence. Eleanor did not raise her voice. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, she took one slow breath, smoothed the front of her cream jacket, and turned toward Thomas with the hurt expression of a woman being wounded by her own family in public. "You are letting this become theater," she said. "Northbridge is waiting, the board is watching, and you are standing here chasing reflections in a wall because a temporary employee gave you a story." Thomas did not answer right away. He was still looking at the frozen image on the screen. The cream sleeve, the black folder, the hand near the keypad. It was not enough to convict anyone, but it was enough to disturb the room. For a man like Thomas Whitaker, disturbance mattered. Clean systems did not produce shadows unless someone had stepped where they should not have stepped. "Caleb," he said, "who has access to my private office today?" Caleb checked the system. "You, Ethan, Mrs. Whitaker, Mrs. Alvarez for emergency administrative support, and executive security." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "So I did have access. That proves nothing." "No," Thomas said. "It proves you did not need Margaret Hale's old badge." Ethan Cole leaned over the table, reading from the laptop feed. "The old badge was not used on your office door. It was used for record storage. Then the camera outage was triggered through the old admin terminal. Whoever planned this knew the system well enough to leave Annie visible in useful places and leave the executive corridor blind." Annie stood near Mr. Harris, hands clasped so tightly her fingers hurt. Useful places. That phrase unsettled her. The errands, the elevators, the blue envelopes, the pens, the copy room, the hallway near Ethan's office. She had thought she was working hard. Now each task looked like a piece of rope tied around her. Patricia Lyle moved closer to Thomas and spoke quietly, though not so quietly that Annie could not hear. We need to separate everyone who gave Annie instructions today. Not just her. Mrs. Alvarez. Executive support. Legal reception. Facilities. Anyone who saw her. Eleanor gave a soft laugh. Patricia, please. You know what happens when a frightened employee senses sympathy. The story grows. Patricia looked at her over the rim of her glasses. In my experience, Mrs. Whitaker, stories grow faster when powerful people are allowed to edit them first. The boardroom went silent again. Annie looked at Patricia with surprise. The woman had not smiled. She had not softened her voice. But there was something in that sentence Annie could lean against. Thomas nodded once. Do it. Eleanor's face remained controlled, but her eyes moved toward the door. Annie noticed. So did Mr. Harris. Looking for someone, ma'am? He asked. Eleanor turned coldly. You forget your place. No, he said. I remember it. That's why I'm still standing here. Before she could respond, Caleb's phone buzzed. He read the message, then looked up. My team found something in the service elevator camera. Put it up, Thomas said. The screen changed to a narrow view from above the service elevator doors. Timestamp. 2:46 p.m. Annie stepped in holding blue envelopes no longer. Only a small box of signing pens. She pressed the executive floor button, then looked down at the written list in her hand. She folded it and put it into the right pocket of her cardigan. Annie's breath caught. That's the list. Thomas leaned forward. Keep going. The elevator doors opened. Annie stepped out. The angle did not show the full corridor, but it showed enough of Annie's right side. At 2:47, a hand entered the frame from the hallway, touched her elbow, and pulled the folded paper from her pocket with 2 quick fingers. Annie did not notice. She was looking ahead. Eleanor said nothing. Caleb replayed it slower. The hand was pale, with a gold ring shaped like a small leaf. Patricia turned her head toward Eleanor's right hand. The same ring rested there. Thomas saw it too. Eleanor lifted her hand slightly, as though she had only just remembered she wore jewelry. This is ridiculous. Many women wear rings. Not many women were standing in that corridor at 2:47, Ethan said. Eleanor's voice sharpened. You are my brother's lawyer. Not hers. I am counsel for the company, Ethan said. That distinction matters today. Annie felt her throat tighten. The list had existed. She had not imagined it. She had not lost it by carelessness. Someone had taken it from her. Thomas looked toward Brooks. Search the executive floor trash, private offices, restrooms, shredding bins. Find that list. Brooks left at once. Eleanor stepped away from the chair. Thomas, stop this. You are embarrassing this family. Thomas turned to her slowly. This company is not your curtain to hide behind. That struck deeper than he intended. Eleanor's lips parted, then closed. For a second, she looked older, not weak, but exposed. The door opened again, and Mrs. Alvarez entered with 2 employees from administrative support. She looked nervous, smoothing her skirt with both hands. Thomas addressed her directly. Did you ask Annie to go to my office today? No, sir. Visitor packets only. Then general support for the meeting. Did Mrs. Whitaker have authority to give her tasks? Mrs. Alvarez hesitated. Everyone saw it. Answer plainly. Patricia said. Mrs. Alvarez swallowed. Mrs. Whitaker often gives tasks to support staff when she is in the building. Most of us don't question it. Eleanor folded her arms. Because I am a Whitaker. Mrs. Alvarez looked down. Yes, ma'am. Thomas's face tightened at that. Not anger now. Recognition. The kind that arrives late and brings shame with it. One of the administrative employees, a young man named Ryan, lifted a hand halfway. Sir, Annie did come by for signing pens. She asked where the good ones were because Mrs. Whitaker said not the cheap ones. A small, bitter smile touched Mr. Harris's mouth. That sounds like Mrs. Whitaker. Eleanor ignored him. So she fetched pens. That proves nothing. No, Thomas said. But everything is beginning to point in the same direction. Brooks returned with a clear evidence bag. Inside was a torn piece of paper, wrinkled and damp from the bottom of a restroom trash bin. Only part of it remained, but the handwriting was visible. Print, revised packets, blue envelopes to legal, guest binders, signing pens, chairman's office, Annie closed her eyes. Patricia stepped closer. Annie, is that the list? Yes, ma'am, she whispered. Thomas did not touch the bag. He only stared at the handwriting. Eleanor, she gave a short laugh, but it had lost its smoothness. You cannot prove I wrote that, Caleb said. We may not need handwriting. The service elevator camera shows someone wearing your ring removing it from Annie's pocket. We also have record storage access through an old badge tied to your former assistant, and a scheduled camera outage through an old terminal from your administrative area, Ethan added, and the file left Thomas's safe during the same window. Eleanor looked around the room, searching for the old order of things, the one where her name carried more weight than facts. But the room had changed. The board members no longer looked at Annie first. They looked at Eleanor. Then Thomas asked the question no one expected yet. Who at Northbridge knows about this file? Ethan blinked. Thomas kept his eyes on Eleanor. If this was only about making Annie look guilty, the file could have stayed missing. But it was placed in her hands before the meeting. That means someone wanted a public discovery, a scandal, a delay. Who benefits if Northbridge loses confidence today? Eleanor's face went still. Caleb's fingers moved over his keyboard. Should I check external communications? Now, Thomas said. Eleanor stepped toward him. You are crossing a line. Thomas met her eyes. No, I think I am finally seeing where the line was drawn. Annie felt the air shift again, but this time it was larger than her. The room was no longer only asking whether she was innocent. It was asking what Eleanor had planned beyond her. Caleb worked quickly, jaw tense. There are outgoing calls from Mrs. Whitaker's office line this morning to a private number. That proves nothing, Eleanor said. Caleb continued. The number is registered to a consulting firm used by Haverstone Biotech. Ethan went pale. Haverstone is our competitor on the Northbridge deal. For the first time, Eleanor Whitaker had no answer ready. Thomas stared at his sister, and the hurt in his face was worse than his anger had been. Tell me that is a mistake. Eleanor's silence filled the room. Annie looked down at the evidence bag in Brooks's hand, at the torn list that had almost disappeared with her future. She thought about how close a lie could come to winning when it wore good clothes and spoke with confidence. Mr. Harris stood beside her, steady as a post. Thomas finally turned to Annie. His voice was quiet. You will not be taken back to security. Annie nodded, but she did not trust herself to speak. Eleanor looked at her then, not with pity, not with regret, but with hatred sharpened by fear. Annie understood in that moment that being proven innocent did not mean being safe. It only meant the real fight had begun. Thomas ordered the boardroom doors closed, but not locked. That detail mattered to Annie. Closed doors meant control. Locked doors meant fear. She stood beside Mr. Harris near the wall while Ethan Cole and Caleb Ross worked through call records, access logs, and copied files with the patience of men who knew one wrong assumption could cost the company more than money. Eleanor remained standing at the far end of the table. No one had asked her to sit. No one had asked her to leave. That left her in a strange place, still powerful enough to frighten people, no longer trusted enough to guide them. Thomas looked at Caleb. Start with the Haverstone number, Caleb nodded. The call from Mrs. Whitaker's office lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Outgoing at 8:37 this morning. Eleanor folded her arms. I make dozens of calls before breakfast. To Haverstone Biotech? Ethan asked. To a consulting firm, she replied. People in our world speak to consultants. Thomas's eyes did not move from her face. People in our world also know which consultants work for competitors. A board member at the far side of the table, a gray-haired woman named Judith Bell, leaned forward. Thomas, we need to protect the Northbridge deal immediately. If Haverstone has even partial access to pricing terms, our position weakens. That is why no one leaves with a device, Thomas said. Eleanor laughed once. Now we are all prisoners because an old camera showed a sleeve? No, Thomas said, because my sealed file was removed from my safe. A temporary employee was framed with enough care to make it believable, and my sister's office called a number tied to our rival the same morning. The word sister did what the word suspect could not. It made the room colder. Annie watched Eleanor's jaw tighten. For the first time, she saw not just cruelty but pride under pressure. Eleanor was not embarrassed by what she had done. She was offended that anyone dared question whether she had the right to do it. Patricia Lyle moved beside Annie and spoke softly. "You can sit." Annie shook her head. "I'm okay. You don't have to prove strength every second." Annie looked at the older woman. "I'm not trying to prove it. I'm trying not to lose it." Patricia said nothing after that, but she stayed close. Caleb's phone rang. He answered, listened, and put it on speaker at Thomas's nod. "This is Ross." A woman's voice came through, fast and nervous. "We checked the outbound email quarantine like you asked. There's a blocked attachment from an unassigned executive account to an external domain. It triggered because the file name matched restricted contract language." "When?" Caleb asked. "Dua him 5 due p.m. Ethan looked at the clock on the wall, though the time had passed. "That's after Annie was found with the folder." Thomas said, "Account name." The woman hesitated. "It was sent under M. Hale. Margaret Hale." The former assistant. Eleanor's face showed nothing. That frightened Annie more than denial. Caleb asked, "Was the attachment delivered?" "No. Blocked." "But there were 3 earlier attempts without attachments. Just short messages." "Read them," Thomas said. The woman took a breath. First message: "Delay is underway." Second: "Board reaction as expected." Third: "Waiting for confirmation before release." No one spoke. Ethan removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That is intent." Eleanor turned sharply. "From an unassigned account. Anyone could have used it." Thomas's voice dropped. "Then you should want us to find who did. I want you to stop humiliating the family name in front of employees." Mr. Harris looked at Annie, then back at Eleanor. "Family name doesn't bleed, ma'am. People do." Judith Bell nodded once, very small, but Annie saw it. Thomas turned to Brooks. "Have security secure Mrs. Whitaker's office." Eleanor stepped forward. "You will not search my office. It is company property." "It is my office. It is company property," Thomas repeated. "And so was the file." For a moment, Annie thought Eleanor might shout. Instead, she smiled. It was thin, bitter, controlled. "You always did love playing righteous." Thomas flinched. "Not much, but enough." Eleanor saw the wound and pressed it. "Father handed you the chair, and you spent the next 20 years pretending you earned the whole building alone. I was there too, Thomas. I sat through the same dinners, listened to the same promises, watched him teach you everything while I was told to smile at donors." Thomas's face hardened. "This is not about our father. It has always been about him," Eleanor said. "You inherited trust. I inherited manners." Annie felt the room shift from corporate crisis into family history. Older faces around the table lowered their eyes, the way people do when private pain becomes public. Eleanor turned toward the board. "You think I am the villain because I refuse to let this company become one man's monument. Thomas built a clean image while people like me kept the doors open, and now he would rather believe a girl who has been here less than a month than his own blood." Annie spoke before she could stop herself. "I didn't ask him to believe me because of who I am. I asked him to check the proof." Eleanor looked at her with cold surprise. Annie's hands trembled, but she kept going. "You keep saying I'm temporary, like that makes me less real. But temporary people still have names. We still remember who speaks to us like we're dirt." Thomas looked at Annie then, and something in his expression changed. Not pity. Respect beginning late. Brooks returned with 2 security officers and a small cardboard box. "Mrs. Whitaker's office is secured. We found a company phone in the bottom drawer, powered off. It was not assigned through current inventory." Caleb took it carefully. "I'll image it." Eleanor's smile vanished. "You went through my drawers?" Thomas said. "You refused transparency. You gave them permission to treat me like a criminal." "No," he said. "Your choices did that." Caleb connected the phone to his laptop. The screen filled with extraction data. It took less than a minute for his face to change. "There are deleted messages," he said. "Recoverable." Ethan leaned close. "To whom?" "Same private number tied to Haverstone's consultant." Thomas gripped the back of his chair. Caleb read carefully. "Message from this morning. She is perfect. Young. Desperate. Quiet. No one will fight too hard for her." Annie felt the words enter her body slowly, like cold water. She had known Eleanor blamed her. She had not known Eleanor had selected her. Mr. Harris took one step closer, not touching her, just near enough. Caleb continued, voice lower now. Another message. Once Thomas delays the meeting, Haverstone moves in with revised terms. I will handle the girl. Judith Bell stood. That is enough for me. Eleanor looked around the room, finally losing the last of her smoothness. You fools. You think Thomas is saving you? Northbridge wanted leverage. Haverstone understood value. I did what this company needed. You sold us out, Ethan said. I created options. Thomas's voice broke through, quiet and final. You chose betrayal and called it strategy. Eleanor turned to him. And you chose a stranger over your sister. Thomas glanced at Annie, then back. No. I chose truth over blood. I should have done it sooner. Those words held the room still. For Annie, the moment did not feel like victory. Her knees were weak. Her face was hot. She could still hear the first accusation, still feel the folder in her hands. Clearing her name did not erase the shame of being judged before anyone bothered to ask who had power and who did not. Thomas seemed to understand some part of that. He came around the table but stopped several feet away, giving her space. Annie, he said, I owe you more than an apology, but I will start with one. I was wrong to accuse you the way I did. Annie looked at him. You scared me. I know. No, sir, she said, her voice quiet. I don't think you do. The honesty landed harder than anger would have. Thomas lowered his eyes. Then I need to learn. Eleanor gave a sharp laugh from the other end of the room. How touching. The billionaire learns humility from the temp. Mr. Harris turned on her. Ma'am, at your age you ought to know better than to mock decency when it finally walks in. Before Eleanor could answer, 2 security officers moved beside her. Brooks spoke evenly. Mrs. Whitaker, we need you to come with us. She looked at Thomas, waiting for him to stop them. He did not. As she passed Annie, Eleanor slowed. Her eyes were hard, but her voice was low. This is not over. Annie did not step back. For me, it is. Eleanor's mouth tightened, and then she was led out past the glass wall, past employees who had once moved aside for her without thinking. This time, they watched. The door closed behind her. Thomas looked at the torn task list sealed in the evidence bag, then at Annie's temporary badge. Patricia, remove her from temporary status immediately. Paid administrative leave until she decides whether she wants to return. Full wages, no conditions. Annie blinked. I still need the job. You have it, Thomas said. If you want it, but not like this. Judith Bell spoke from the table. And the board should approve emergency assistance for Miss Carter's education. Quietly, properly, not as charity, as repair. Annie looked down because if she looked at anyone too long, she would cry. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. Miss Annie? She turned. He held out a clean napkin from the coffee tray. For the toner on your sleeve. There was no toner left there. They both knew it. Annie took the napkin anyway. Sometimes kindness arrived small because small was all a person could carry without breaking. Annie did not leave the boardroom right away. People moved around her, gathering papers, checking phones, speaking in low voices about Northbridge, Haverstone, legal exposure, and damage control. The language changed once powerful people were injured. When Annie had been accused, the room had wanted answers fast. Now that Eleanor's betrayal threatened the company, everyone wanted process. Thomas stood near the glass wall with Ethan Cole and Judith Bell. Caleb had taken the company phone to IT under security escort. Patricia was drafting a written statement for human resources. Mr. Harris stayed beside the coffee tray as if he belonged there, though Annie knew he remained because she was still there. She looked at the empty chair where Eleanor had stood minutes before. The woman was gone, but her words had not left. Young, desperate, quiet. No one will fight too hard for her. Annie had spent most of her life trying not to be trouble. She kept her voice low in offices, said yes ma'am and no sir, accepted extra work without complaint, and thanked people for things they should have done fairly in the first place. Now she understood how that quiet had looked to someone like Eleanor, not dignity. Opportunity. Thomas approached carefully. Annie, She straightened without meaning to. Yes, sir. You don't have to stand at attention. I don't know how else to stand in this room. He accepted that without pretending it did not hurt. Patricia is preparing the paperwork. You'll be paid for the rest of the week, and for any time connected to the investigation. If you choose to come back, it will not be as temporary support. Annie folded the napkin Mr. Harris had given her into a small square. What happens if I don't come back? You still get paid, and the education assistance still stands? That sounds like hush money. Judith, still nearby, looked up. Ethan went still. Thomas did not flinch. It would be, if it came with silence attached. Does it? No. Annie studied his face. People say that when they need you to trust them quickly. They do, he said. You don't have to trust me quickly. The answer unsettled her because it did not push. She looked down at her badge, the word temporary printed beneath her name. I need to pick up my things. I'll have someone walk with you. I don't need guarding. I meant support. Annie almost smiled, but it faded. Today those looked the same. Thomas stepped back half an inch. Then choose who walks with you. She turned to Mr. Harris. He lifted his eyebrows as if the whole thing had been obvious from the start. I'll go, he said. Been walking halls longer than most folks been signing checks. They left the boardroom together. The executive hallway was no longer crowded, but eyes followed them from desks and glass offices. Some people looked ashamed. Some looked curious. One assistant quickly looked away when Annie met her eyes. The attention felt different from before, but not easier. Suspicion and pity both had a way of making a person feel smaller. At the service elevator, Mr. Harris pressed the button with his thumb. Don't take on everybody's face, Miss Annie. What does that mean? Means some folks feel bad because they judged you. Some feel bad because they got caught judging you. Those are not the same, and neither one is yours to carry. The elevator opened. Annie stepped inside and leaned against the rail. For the first time since Thomas had shouted at her, she felt how tired her body was. Her hands trembled now that no one needed them to hold steady. Mr. Harris pretended not to notice. You ever eat that banana? She gave a small breath of a laugh. No. Figured. Still in your bag. Probably smashed. Then it's pudding now. Still food. This time she did laugh, short and broken. It almost turned into a sob, so she pressed her lips together and stared at the elevator numbers. On the support floor, the copy room looked exactly as she had left it. Paper stacked by size, toner cartridge open, visitor binders half finished, the jammed printer blinking as if the worst thing that had happened all afternoon involved labels. Annie's backpack sat beneath the side counter. She knelt to pick it up, then stopped. The motion reminded her of the camera image, of herself on the screen proving she had been somewhere else. Mr. Harris stood at the doorway. Take your time. Annie slid the backpack onto the counter. Inside were her notebook, receipts, the uneaten sandwich, and the folded college letter she carried like a private bruise. She put the napkin from Mr. Harris into the front pocket, though she did not know why. Mrs. Alvarez appeared at the door, wringing her hands. Annie. Annie turned. Her supervisor looked older than she had that morning. I should have said something sooner. About Mrs. Whitaker. About how she treats people. Annie did not answer. Mrs. Alvarez swallowed. I told you not to take anything personal. That was wrong. It was personal. I just didn't want you hurt. But I got hurt anyway. Yes, Mrs. Alvarez said quietly. You did. That honesty was better than apology, though not enough to erase anything. Annie zipped her backpack. I know you were scared too. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes filled. That doesn't make it right. No, ma'am. It doesn't. They stood in the copy room with the printer still blinking between them. Then Mrs. Alvarez moved aside, and Annie walked out. By the time she reached the lobby, Thomas was there. Not with a crowd, not with reporters, just standing near the security gates, holding a folded paper. Ethan stood several feet behind him, giving space. Annie stopped. Is there something else? Yes, Thomas said. There is, but only if you're willing to hear it. Mr. Harris crossed his arms. Careful, sir. Girls had enough speeches today. Thomas nodded. Then I'll keep it plain. He looked at Annie, not over her, not through her, but at her. When I saw that folder in your hands, I decided too quickly what it meant. I asked who sent you, because I assumed you had been used by someone dishonest. I did not ask who might be using the room against you. That was my failure. Annie held the backpack strap. You believed her because she was your sister. Yes, and because I looked like someone who needed money. The lobby seemed to quiet around them. Thomas's face tightened. Yes, the word was small, but it cost him something. Annie respected that more than an excuse. My mother always says an apology has to know what it did, Annie said. Otherwise, it's just manners. Thomas absorbed that. Then I am sorry for accusing you in front of people who should have been told to wait for facts. I am sorry for letting your private life be used against you. And I am sorry I built a company where someone could believe a temporary employee had no one to fight for her. Mr. Harris looked down, blinking slowly. Annie did not know what to do with the apology. Part of her wanted to hand it back. Part of her wanted to sit on the lobby floor and cry because someone had finally named the thing correctly. What's that paper? She asked. Thomas looked at the folded page in his hand. A written confirmation. Paid leave, full wages, formal clearance of any accusation, and an offer for education support. You don't have to sign anything today. She took it but did not unfold it. I'll read it. You should have someone you trust read it too. I will. He nodded. Good. Through the glass doors, evening had started to settle over Charleston. Office workers crossed the plaza with briefcases and takeout bags. A city bus sighed at the curb, its doors opening with a tired hiss. Annie looked at it and realized she had missed the one she usually took. Thomas followed her gaze. I can have a car take you home. Annie shook her head quickly. No thank you. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. I'm heading that way. My truck ain't fancy, but it knows the roads. Annie looked at him. You don't have to. I know. That settled it. As they stepped outside, the harbor air hit Annie's face, warm and damp. Behind her, Whitaker Global's blue glass reflected the sunset, making the tower look softer than it was. She paused once at the curb and looked back. For weeks she had walked into that building hoping not to be noticed. Now she left knowing invisibility had almost destroyed her. Mr. Harris opened the passenger door of his old pickup. You all right? Annie looked at the paper in her hand, then at the tower, then at the bus pulling away. No, she said. He nodded. That's an honest place to start. She climbed into the truck, holding her backpack on her lap. The day was not over. The investigation was not over. Eleanor's threat still sat in the back of her mind like a locked door waiting to open. But as Mr. Harris pulled into traffic, Annie unfolded Thomas's letter just enough to see her name printed clearly at the top. Not temporary staff. Annie Carter. For the first time all day, she let herself breathe. Mr. Harris's pickup smelled faintly of motor oil, peppermint, and the paper bag of biscuits he kept on the floorboard for emergencies he called blood sugar, or bad moods. Annie sat with her backpack on her knees, and Thomas Whitaker's letter folded in her hand. Charleston rolled past the window in pieces. Office lights, brick sidewalks, oak branches, people leaving work with dinner plans and phone calls waiting. The world looked too ordinary for what had happened. Mr. Harris kept both hands on the wheel. You want quiet? Or you want an old man talking nonsense? Annie looked out the window. Quiet for a minute. Quiet it is. He gave her exactly that. No questions. No advice. No lesson wrapped in a story from 1978. Just the steady sound of tires on pavement and the turn signal clicking when he changed lanes. Annie had spent the day being watched, doubted, and explained by other people. Silence felt like a blanket, thin but real. After a while, she unfolded the letter again. Paid administrative leave. Formal clearance pending final review. Education assistance to be discussed at her discretion. The words were professional, careful, and still hard to believe. A few hours earlier, she had been one accusation away from losing everything. Now a billionaire's signature sat under her name as if paper could lift the weight Eleanor had put on her chest. Don't read it too many times tonight, Mr. Harris said. I'm trying to find the catch. That's a habit poor folks learn early. She glanced at him. He shrugged. Rich folks get offers. Poor folks get traps. Takes time to tell the difference. Annie folded the letter. Do you think it's real? I think Mr. Whitaker got shamed by the truth today. Shame can either make a man better or meaner. We'll see which one he chooses tomorrow. They stopped at a red light near a church with a sign that read, "Be kind. Everyone is carrying something." Annie almost laughed at how simple it sounded. How easy. Eleanor had carried pearls and a family name into that room and nearly crushed Annie with both. "My mother's going to be scared," Annie said. "Then we tell her facts before fear gets creative. You don't have to come up." "I know. You keep saying that. Because favors with strings aren't favors. I got no strings." Annie looked down at her hands. "Thank you." Mr. Harris nodded once, accepting it without making her feel smaller for needing help. Her apartment building came into view above the old dry cleaner. The green awning faded almost white at the edges. Mr. Harris parked by the curb but left the engine running. "You want me to wait?" Annie looked at the second-floor window where one lamp glowed behind thin curtains. "No. I need to tell her myself." "All right. Call if you need a witness, a ride, or somebody to fuss at a bill collector." That almost made her smile. "Good night, Mr. Harris." "Good night, Miss Annie. Eat that sandwich before it files a complaint." She climbed out with her backpack and stood on the sidewalk until his truck pulled away. Then she went upstairs. Denise Carter was sitting in the armchair by the window with a blanket around her legs, and the television turned low. She looked up the moment Annie opened the door. "You're late." Annie shut the door behind her. "I know." Denise studied her face, and whatever question she had prepared changed shape. "Come here." That was all it took. Annie crossed the room and sank to her knees beside the chair, pressing her forehead against her mother's lap like she had when she was little, and the world could be repaired by a hand on her hair. Denise placed that hand there now. "Who hurt you?" she asked. Annie closed her eyes. "A woman at work tried to blame me for stealing." Denise's hand stilled. "Tried? They found proof I didn't do it. Some proof. Enough for now." "For now?" Annie pulled back and handed her the folded letter. Denise read slowly, lips moving over certain words. Her face changed at paid leave, changed again at formal clearance, then stopped at education assistance. "What did they say to you?" Annie looked away. "A lot. Annie, they said I was desperate, that people like me do desperate things. They brought up you being sick." Denise's mouth tightened, not from weakness now, but from anger. "They used my illness to call you a thief?" "Yes, ma'am." For a long moment, Denise said nothing. Then she folded the letter carefully and set it on the side table. "Listen to me. Need is not shame. Debt is not shame. Sickness is not shame. The shame belongs to the person who uses those things like weapons." Annie's throat burned. "I was so scared I couldn't talk." "But you did talk." "Barely. Barely counts when silence was easier." Annie wiped her face with her sleeve, annoyed that tears had come now, when the danger had passed. Denise leaned back, tired from the force of her own anger. "Did anyone stand with you?" "Mr. Harris, and Miss Lyle from HR." Later, Mr. Whitaker apologized. Denise's eyebrows lifted. "The billionaire himself?" "Yes." "Was it a real apology or a rich man apology?" Annie gave a wet laugh. "What's the difference? A real apology names the wound. A rich man apology names the inconvenience." "He named the wound." Denise nodded slowly. "Then maybe there's hope for him." Annie stood and went to the kitchen because both of them needed something ordinary. She warmed chicken soup from a container Mrs. Alvarez had once given her after a late shift. The smell filled the room, simple and familiar. Denise ate half a bowl. Annie ate her peanut butter sandwich over the sink, too tired to use a plate. Later, after helping her mother settle into bed, Annie sat at the kitchen table with the letter open in front of her. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator and a car passing below. She took out her small notebook and turned to a blank page. For months, the notebook had held lists: medication prices, work hours, bus schedules, tuition balances. Tonight, she wrote one sentence: "I am not temporary." She stared at the words until they blurred. Across town, Thomas Whitaker remained in his office long after most lights in the building had gone dark. The sealed folder lay on his desk. Beside it sat a printed copy of Eleanor's recovered messages. "She is perfect. Young, desperate, quiet. No one will fight too hard for her." He had read that line 6 times. Each time, it accused him too. Ethan Cole stood near the window, jacket off, tie loosened. Northbridge agreed to postpone until Monday. They want written assurance there was no data transfer. Can we give it? Preliminary review says the blocked email stopped the attachment. Caleb's team is still checking for photos, copies, external drives. Thomas nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. What happens to Eleanor? Internal suspension tonight. Formal board action tomorrow. Legal exposure after that depends on how much she shared with Haverstone. Thomas looked at the city lights reflected in the glass. She said I chose a stranger over my sister. You chose evidence. I chose evidence late. Ethan did not argue. Thomas picked up Annie's temporary badge from the desk. Brooks had brought it to him after issuing a visitor clearance for her exit. The plastic felt cheap in his hand. Temporary support. He thought of the way she had stood there, shaking but still saying, "Please don't bring my mother into this." My father used to say a company reveals itself by how it treats the people who cannot hurt it, Thomas said. Ethan looked at him. Did he live by that? No, but he said it well. A tired smile passed between them and disappeared. Thomas set the badge down. I want a full audit of temporary staffing practices, pay, complaint channels, supervisor authority, executive conduct, all of it. That will make people uncomfortable. Good. Ethan gathered his papers. And Annie? Thomas looked at the badge again. Nothing about her without her consent. No press statement using her name. No charity performance. No photograph. No internal hero story. No one turning her pain into company redemption. Ethan nodded. That may be the first smart thing anyone has said today. After Ethan left, Thomas stayed alone. He opened his desk drawer and took out an old photograph. His mother in a diner uniform, standing beside him when he was 11, smiling despite exhaustion. He had not looked at it in years. He remembered how men in suits used to speak past her, how she would come home and say, "Tommy, never let money make you forget who wipes the tables after the meeting ends." He had forgotten, not all at once, but slowly, in polished rooms where quiet people became background. Thomas turned off the office lamp. Before leaving, he wrote one note on a legal pad and left it on top of Annie's badge. Start by listening. In the small apartment above the dry cleaner, Annie fell asleep at the kitchen table for 20 minutes, her cheek near the notebook. When she woke, the words were still there. I am not temporary. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and went to check on her mother. Tomorrow would bring questions, paperwork, whispers, maybe more trouble from Eleanor. Annie knew that, but she also knew something else now. A lie had chosen her because it thought she had no witness. It had been wrong. The next morning, Annie woke before the alarm. For a few seconds, she did not remember why her chest felt tight. Then the day before returned in pieces. Thomas's voice, Eleanor's pearl necklace, the black folder, the screen showing her in the copy room, the recovered message calling her perfect because she was young, desperate, and quiet. She sat up slowly. The apartment was still dim. Outside, a garbage truck groaned down the street. Her mother was asleep in the bedroom, one hand resting on top of the blanket. Annie checked on her, then went to the kitchen and made oatmeal with brown sugar because it was cheap and warm and did not ask anything from her. On the table, Thomas Whitaker's letter waited beside her notebook. I am not temporary. She read the sentence once, then closed the notebook before she could start doubting it. At 8:13, her phone rang. The screen showed Whitaker Global. Annie let it ring twice before answering. Annie Carter speaking. Annie, this is Patricia Lyle. I hope I'm not calling too early. No, Mom. I wanted you to hear this directly. You are not required to come in today. Your pay is active. Your clearance letter is being processed. Mr. Whitaker also asked that no one contact you except HR or legal unless you approve it. Annie stirred the oatmeal, though it was already done. Is Mrs. Whitaker still there? There was a pause. She has been suspended from all company duties pending board review. Suspended, Annie repeated. For now, there are procedures. Annie understood. When poor people made mistakes, consequences came fast. When powerful people did harm, consequences needed meetings. Patricia seemed to hear what Annie did not say. I know that word may not feel like enough. It doesn't. No, it wouldn't. That honesty made Annie hold the phone a little tighter. Patricia continued. There is one more thing. Mr. Whitaker would like to speak with you today, but only if you agree. He said your mother may be present, and you may bring anyone you trust. Annie looked toward the bedroom. About what? Education support, medical assistance, and a formal apology in writing. Annie nearly laughed, but not because it was funny. That's a lot to put in one meeting. Yes, it is. I don't want a room full of lawyers. I told him that. And? He said 2 people maximum from the company. Him and me. Annie looked at the oatmeal, suddenly not hungry. Can Mr. Harris come? I'll arrange it. After the call ended, Denise appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her robe. You were using your polite voice. Company? Annie nodded. They want to meet. Today? Yes, ma'am. Denise walked slowly to the chair and sat. Then we eat first. Annie looked at her. You're not worried? I am worried. That's why we eat first. Empty stomachs make fear louder. By noon, Mr. Harris knocked on the apartment door wearing a clean plaid shirt and carrying a paper bag. Denise opened it before Annie could. You must be Mr. Harris. Yes, ma'am. I hear you stood with my daughter. He removed his cap. She stood fine on her own. I just made sure folks noticed. Denise studied him, then stepped aside. Come in. I made coffee. He lifted the paper bag, brought biscuits. Then you can definitely come in. The meeting took place not at Whitaker Global but in a quiet conference room at a community center 4 blocks from Annie's apartment. Patricia had suggested neutral ground. Thomas had agreed. That mattered to Annie more than she expected. Thomas arrived without a driver entering first, without assistance, without a camera crew. He wore a dark suit but no tie. Patricia came with a folder and sat to the side, not between them. Mr. Harris took the chair nearest Annie's mother, as if his job was to guard the dignity of the room. Thomas stood when Denise entered. Mrs. Carter. Denise looked him up and down. Mr. Whitaker. Thank you for meeting with me. I came because my daughter said she was willing. Don't mistake that for comfort. I won't. Everyone sat. Thomas placed both hands on the table. Annie. I want to begin with what should have happened yesterday. You were falsely accused in my company, in front of senior leadership, while doing work you had been assigned. My sister used your temporary status, your financial strain, and your mother's illness to make you look guilty. I believed too much, too quickly. I am sorry. Annie kept her eyes on him. Why did you believe it? Patricia lowered her gaze to the folder. Denise watched Thomas without blinking. Thomas answered slowly, because the file was in your hands, because the cameras were down, because I was afraid of losing the Northbridge deal, and because Eleanor knew exactly which doubts people like me are too ready to accept. People like you? Annie asked. People with power, he said. People used to being believed. Denise nodded once, not approving, just acknowledging that he had not dodged. Thomas continued. There will be a formal letter clearing you. No mention of suspicion will remain in your employment record. Your temporary contract will be converted to a paid trainee position if you want it, with health benefits and tuition support. If you do not want to return, you will still receive 6 months of wages and the education assistance. Annie looked at Patricia. Can he do that without making me sign away my right to talk about what happened? Patricia answered. Yes. I made sure of it. No non-disclosure tied to assistance. No release of legal claims required today. You may have an outside attorney review everything. Thomas pushed the folder gently toward Annie. I encourage you to, Mr. Harris muttered. That's the first sensible billionaire sentence I've heard. Denise coughed once to hide a smile. Annie opened the folder. The numbers made her dizzy. Tuition coverage, stipend, medical grant application support, paid roll, counseling services, transportation assistance. Each line looked official, but her mind kept searching for the hook hidden under the bait. This is too much, she said. Thomas shook his head. No, what happened to you was too much. This is repair, not generosity. Denise leaned forward. And your sister? Thomas's face tightened. The board removed her voting privileges this morning. Legal counsel is preparing to refer evidence to authorities. We are also notifying Northbridge and Haverstone's compliance office. Preparing, Denise said. Not doing. Mrs. Carter, Patricia said. Some steps require documentation to avoid giving her room to claim mishandling. Denise looked at her. I understand procedure. I also understand delay. Patricia accepted that. Then I'll say it plainly. I will push for action, not delay. The room settled. Annie turned a page and found a copy of Eleanor's recovered message. She is perfect. Young, desperate, quiet. No one will fight too hard for her. Her throat closed again. Thomas saw what she was reading. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm glad I saw it, Annie said. Now I know it wasn't an accident, Mr. Harris said. Sometimes knowing the knife was aimed helps you stop wondering why it hurt. Denise reached across the table and touched Annie's wrist. You don't have to decide everything today. Annie nodded, but her eyes stayed on the folder. I want to go back to school. Then that is where we begin, Thomas said. No, Annie replied, surprising herself. We begin with my record. I wanted in writing that I did not steal, did not help anyone steal, and did not violate company policy. Patricia was already writing. Good. And I want Mrs. Alvarez and the support staff trained on what executives can and cannot order temporary workers to do. Thomas nodded. Done. And Mr. Harris shouldn't get in trouble for speaking up. Mr. Harris leaned back. Now, don't drag me into your demands. Annie looked at him. You dragged yourself into my trouble. Denise smiled faintly. Thomas looked at Mr. Harris. There will be no retaliation. In fact, I would like him on the Employee Conduct Review Committee. Mr. Harris frowned. Do I have to wear a tie? No. Then maybe. For the first time, Annie felt the room breathe. When the meeting ended, Thomas stood but did not offer his hand until Annie offered hers first. She noticed that. So did Denise. His handshake was careful, not weak, as if he understood strength was not the same thing as pressure. Outside the community center, afternoon light fell across the sidewalk. Mr. Harris helped Denise down the step, while Patricia waited by her car. Thomas paused beside Annie. I know this does not fix yesterday, he said. No, Annie said. It doesn't, but maybe it can help tomorrow. She looked at him. Tomorrow depends on whether you still care when nobody is watching. Thomas nodded. That is fair. Annie walked home with her mother and Mr. Harris, the folder tucked under her arm. The papers inside did not erase the accusation, but they gave shape to something she had not felt in a long time. A choice. That evening, she opened her notebook again. Beneath, I am not temporary. She wrote a second line. I do not have to be silent to be safe. Then she underlined it once, closed the notebook, and sat beside her mother while the kettle warmed on the stove. The choice did not feel clean the next morning. Annie woke to 3 missed calls from unknown numbers and 1 voicemail that was mostly breathing before a woman's voice said, You better be careful who you embarrass. She sat at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand while the kettle clicked itself off. For a moment, she considered deleting it and pretending she had never heard it. Then she remembered the line in her notebook. I do not have to be silent to be safe. She played the message once more, recorded it on her mother's old phone, and sent both copies to Patricia Lyle. Denise watched from the doorway. That from her? I don't know. You know enough. Annie nodded. I'm not scared. Her mother gave her a look. Annie let out a breath. I'm scared. I'm just not stopping. That's different. That's better. By 10, Patricia called back. Her voice was calm, but Annie could hear the tightness beneath it. Do not answer unknown numbers. Do not respond. I'm forwarding this to company counsel and security. Mr. Whitaker wants to know if you need transportation today. I'm not coming in. I know. This is about a meeting with the investigator later this afternoon. Your choice. Annie looked at the folder on the table. Who else will be there? Me, Ethan Cole, an outside investigator named Marion Brooks, and Mr. Harris, if you still want him. Mr. Whitaker? He asked to attend. I told him this might be easier without him. Annie appreciated that. Then without him. Done. The meeting was held in the same community center room, but it felt different now. The first meeting had been about repair. This one was about proof. Marion Brooks was a black woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair, a brown leather briefcase, and the manner of someone who did not waste words because she had spent too many years listening to people waste truth. She shook Annie's hand. Miss Carter, I'm not company staff. I was brought in because Mr. Whitaker needs findings no one can accuse his office of shaping. You can stop at any time. You can ask for a break. You can refuse to answer until you speak with counsel. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now tell me what happened, and don't make yourself smaller while you do it. Annie looked at her. Marian opened her notebook. People who have been cornered often start apologizing inside their own story. Don't. Mr. Harris, sitting near the door, murmured, I like her. Annie almost smiled. Then she told it again. The morning errands, Eleanor's list, the copy room, the blue envelopes, the signing pens, the corridor, the folder pressed into her hands, Thomas's voice, the accusation, the way Eleanor brought up her mother. She did not cry this time. Her voice trembled twice, but it did not break. Marian asked precise questions. When Eleanor handed you the folder, which hand did she use? Did you notice the seal? Were there any other staff members in the hallway? Did she touch your cardigan pocket? Did she step behind you in the elevator? Annie stopped. In the elevator, the camera showed a hand removing the list from your pocket. I want you to remember the moment before that. Annie closed her eyes. The service elevator. The hum. The box of pens. The folded list. A smell like expensive perfume. Sharp and floral. She had thought someone was passing too close behind her as the doors opened. I smelled her perfume, Annie said. I didn't see her face, but I remember that smell from the lobby. She wore it every time she came in. Marian wrote that down. Good. Patricia leaned forward. We found the torn list. Lab review is checking for fingerprints. Annie looked up. Can paper still show that after being in the trash? Sometimes, Ethan said. Depends on handling, but we already have enough to keep going. Enough for what? Ethan exchanged a glance with Patricia. Marian answered instead. Enough to prove the accusation against you had no factual basis. Enough to prove someone manipulated access and camera systems. Enough to establish a pattern. The question now is whether Eleanor acted alone. The room cooled around that sentence. Mr. Harris sat up. You think she had help inside? Marian did not look away. Someone used general admin credentials. Someone kept an old badge active. Someone knew when Northbridge would receive delay news. Powerful people often do ugly things through other people's hands. Annie thought of every assistant who avoided her eyes, every lowered voice, every person who had watched Eleanor treat staff like furniture and called it personality. At Whitaker Global, Thomas stood in the main conference room before 12 senior managers, including Mrs. Alvarez, Caleb Ross, and the heads of legal, HR, facilities, and executive operations. He had slept 3 hours. No one commented on it. This company almost destroyed an innocent employee yesterday, he said. Not because evidence proved she was guilty, but because enough of us found the accusation convenient. Mrs. Alvarez looked down. Thomas continued. I want every temporary worker access policy reviewed. I want every executive instruction channel documented. I want legacy credentials disabled and audited. And I want to know who allowed Eleanor Whitaker to use company staff as personal servants. No one spoke. Thomas looked across the table. That was not rhetorical. A senior operations director cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitaker's position was informal but understood. She is family. Was family written in the policy manual? No. Then why did it outrank policy? The man had no answer. Caleb raised his hand slightly. We found something else. The old Margaret Hale badge was reactivated 3 weeks ago, but not by Eleanor's current account. By whom? An admin override from executive operations. All eyes moved toward a woman named Claire Voss, Eleanor's former liaison to the board. Claire went pale. I processed dozens of access changes. If a request came through, who requested it? Thomas asked. Caleb read from his laptop. The note says, Temporary archival review for EW. Claire swallowed. Mrs. Whitaker asked me to restore access for old records. She said you approved it. Did you confirm with me? No. She said it was time. Sensitive. Thomas held her gaze. And that was enough? Claire's eyes filled. She's your sister. The words landed hard. Thomas heard in them the same failure repeated in another voice. She's your sister. As if relation were authorization. As if power did not need paper when it came dressed in familiarity. Effective immediately, he said. No family relationship, board title, or executive name bypasses written approval. If anyone finds that difficult, resign today. No one moved. His phone buzzed. Patricia had sent a message. Threat voicemail received by Annie. Forwarded for review. Thomas read it twice, then turned to Ethan, who had just entered. Eleanor is contacting Annie. Ethan's expression sharpened. Directly? Unknown number. Threat implied. That violates the suspension order. Thomas looked toward the windows, jaw set. Then we stopped treating this like an internal embarrassment. Back at the community center, Marion closed her notebook. Miss Carter, I want you to consider filing a police report regarding the threat. Not because the company says so. Because you have the right. Annie looked at her mother's empty chair in her mind, the blanket, the pill organizer, the life that had made her careful. Police reports sounded like court dates, attention, danger, but silence sounded like Eleanor's smile. I'll file it, Annie said. Mr. Harris nodded once. I'll drive. Patricia stood. I'll coordinate with a victim advocate. Ethan added, and I'll provide the evidence packet. Annie looked around the room. Yesterday she had been alone in a boardroom full of people. Today she sat in a smaller room with fewer people, yet it felt larger because no one was asking her to disappear. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Everyone saw her face change. Marion held out her hand. May I? Annie passed it over without answering. Marion let it ring, then stop. A text appeared. You think they careful? Wait until the deal collapses. Ethan read it over Marion's shoulder. That sounds like leverage. Marion's eyes narrowed. No, that sounds like panic. Annie stared at the message. And the fear inside her shifted. It did not vanish. It sharpened. She's afraid of something, Annie said. Marion looked at her. Yes. What? Ethan's phone rang before anyone could answer. He stepped aside, listened, then turned back with his face changed. Northbridge received an anonymous packet this morning, he said. Screenshots, selected documents, and a statement claiming Whitaker Global is covering up a theft by a temporary employee. Patricia closed her eyes. Mr. Harris muttered something under his breath. Annie felt the room tilt. Ethan continued. Northbridge is pausing negotiations until they review. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Annie understood Eleanor's message. Wait until the deal collapses. Marion put her pen down. Now we know the next move. Annie's hands went cold, but her voice came out clear. She still wants them to think I did it. Yes, Marion said. Because if the lie survives outside the building, the truth inside the building is not enough. Annie looked at the phone, then at the evidence folder. Then we make the truth louder, she said. Thomas received Ethan's call while standing outside the executive operations room, where Caleb's team was disabling old credentials one by one. He listened without interrupting. Anonymous packet. Northbridge pause. Screenshots. Claim of a cover-up. Temporary employee named as the thief. By the time Ethan finished, Thomas was already walking. Find the source, he said. We're checking headers now, Ethan replied. Northbridge forwarded what they received. Does it include Annie's name? Yes. Thomas stopped at the elevator. Then this is no longer internal. No, Ethan said. And Thomas, there is something else. The packet includes a cropped image from the boardroom security angle. Annie holding the folder. Nothing before, nothing after. Thomas closed his eyes for 1 second. Of course it does. It was designed to travel. The elevator opened. Thomas stepped in. Get Marion Brooks on the line. Patricia, too. We respond with facts, but Annie decides how much of herself becomes public. You think Northbridge will wait? They will if they want the truth more than a cleaner story. And if they don't, Thomas looked at his reflection in the elevator doors. Then we learn what kind of partner they are. At the community center, Annie sat very still after hearing the news. The anonymous packet had done what Eleanor could not finish in the boardroom. It had taken the lie outside, where strangers could touch it, forward it, judge it, and never once look Annie in the eyes. Her name was in rooms she had never entered. Patricia read the message from Northbridge on her tablet. They have not accused you directly. They are requesting clarification. Annie gave her a tired look. That is a polite way to say they believe enough of it to stop the deal. Marion Brooks nodded. Correct. Mr. Harris leaned back, arms crossed. Then give them everything. The copy room footage, the list, the old badge, the messages. Ethan, still on speaker, said, "We can provide evidence, but some of it is part of an active investigation." Marion looked at the phone. Evidence does not have to become a circus, but silence will help Eleanor. Annie stared at the unknown number text still on her phone. You think they care about you? Wait until the deal collapses. She could feel the trap now. If Whitaker Global lost Northbridge, people would need someone to blame. Eleanor wanted the company to look at Annie and see cost, not harm. Will people at Northbridge see my personal information? Annie asked. Patricia answered quickly. Not if I can help it. That's not an answer. No, Patricia admitted. A full legal packet may include your employment status and the false claim made against you. We can redact medical references and financial details. We should. Annie looked at Marion. What would you do? I would separate your truth from company damage control. They are not the same thing. Whitaker Global needs to save a deal. You need to protect your name. Sometimes those goals overlap. Sometimes they don't. That made Annie quiet. The door opened, and Thomas stepped in with no entourage, only his phone and a folder. He paused just inside. May I come in? It was a small question, but Annie noticed it came before he entered fully. She nodded. Thomas sat across from her, not at the head of the table. Northbridge has agreed to a secure call in 40 minutes. Their general counsel, compliance chief, and 2 executives will attend. I will present the company evidence. But your name is involved, and I will not speak for you without permission. Annie's fingers tightened around her phone. Did you do that yesterday? Speak for me? Thomas accepted the hit. Yes. And you were wrong? Yes. She looked down. What do you need from me? Nothing you do not choose to give. We can present the timeline without your voice. We can identify you as employee A. We can state that the accusation was false. Or, if you want, you may speak. But I am not asking you to perform pain so executives feel better. Mr. Harris glanced at Thomas, almost approving despite himself. Annie thought of the cropped image. Her hands on the folder, her fear turned into evidence. People had already seen her without hearing her. That was how the lie worked. I want to speak, she said. Denise would have told her to eat first. Mr. Harris looked like he might say the same. Patricia looked concerned. Thomas did not look relieved. That helped. Marion leaned forward. Then we prepare. You say only what you know. No pleading, no defending your worth. Facts first, then harm. Annie nodded. Facts first, then harm. 40 minutes later, they gathered around the community center's conference screen. Thomas could have taken the call from his tower office, with better lighting and the company seal behind him. Instead, he sat beside Annie under plain ceiling tiles with a coffee stain on the table between them. Marion sat on Annie's other side. Patricia and Ethan joined from separate laptops, each with documents ready. Northbridge appeared in 4 boxes. Older executives, neat backgrounds, careful faces. Their general counsel, a white-haired man named Robert Sloan, spoke first. Mr. Whitaker, we appreciate the urgency. We received material this morning alleging mishandling of confidential documents and a possible theft by one of your employees. Thomas replied, the allegation against the employee is false. One of the Northbridge executives, a woman named Dana Klein, glanced down at papers. The image we received shows her holding the sealed folder. Yes, Thomas said. A cropped image. You will now see the timeline around it. Caleb's report appeared on screen. Ethan walked them through it. Copy room footage at 2:33. Legal reception at 2:42. Executive corridor outage from 2:31 to 2:49. Legacy badge activity. Service elevator footage, showing the task list removed from Annie's pocket, recovered messages from Eleanor's unassigned company phone. Each point landed without drama. The room did not need drama. It needed sequence. Robert Sloan frowned. You are saying a member of the Whitaker family orchestrated the breach? Thomas looked directly into the camera. Yes. And framed the employee? Yes. Why? To to delay this deal, damage my authority, and create an opening for Haverstone Biotech. Dana Klein's expression sharpened. Haverstone? Ethan displayed the call log tied to Haverstone's consultant. We are sending the full packet through secure counsel channels. Robert leaned back. This is highly unusual. Marion spoke before Thomas could. False accusations often look unusual once someone finally checks the whole story. Robert looked at her box. And you are? Marion Brooks, independent investigator. Dana's eyes moved to Annie. Miss Carter, are you willing to speak? Annie felt every person in the room turn still. She sat up, hands in her lap so no one could see them shake. Yes, ma'am. Were you instructed to carry that folder? Yes. Mrs. Whitaker handed it to me near Mr. Whitaker's office and told me to take it to the boardroom. Did you know what it was? No, Mom. Did you access, copy, photograph, or share any document inside it? No, Mom. Robert Sloan asked. Why should we believe your account? The question was not cruel, but Annie felt it anyway. Thomas's jaw tightened. Marion did not move. Annie took one breath. Because the evidence already proves where I was, she said. But also because I have no power in that company. I did not have access to a safe, a legacy badge, camera maintenance, or outside consultants. I had a task list, a box of pens, and a temporary badge. That is the truth. Dana Klein's face softened slightly. I'm sorry your name was sent to us in that manner. Annie looked at her through the screen. I appreciate that. But sorry will not stop people from repeating it. No, Dana said. It will not. Thomas spoke then. Northbridge received a lie using her image and her name. If you pause this deal, pause it because you are reviewing a corporate security breach. Not because you believe a young woman with no access somehow defeated systems built by executives. Robert looked down. We will need time. Thomas nodded. Take it. But I am asking you to confirm in writing today that Northbridge does not consider Miss Carter a suspect based on the evidence provided. Robert hesitated. Dana answered first. I can agree to that. Pending counsel language. Annie exhaled quietly. The call ended after more procedural language. Secure transfer. Review window. Haverstone notice. Compliance cooperation. When the screen went dark, nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Mr. Harris said, Well, nobody threw a chair. That's progress. Annie laughed once, more from exhaustion than humor. Thomas turned to her. You handled that with more grace than they deserved. No, Annie said. I handled it with facts. Marion closed her notebook. Facts with a spine. Good combination. Patricia's phone buzzed. She read the message and looked up. Northbridge Council just sent preliminary written confirmation. They do not consider Annie responsible for the document breach based on evidence reviewed today. Annie pressed her hand over her mouth. For 1 second she looked younger than 18. Thomas stood. Good. But Ethan's voice came from the laptop tense. We're not done. Everyone looked over. He continued. Haverstone just issued a statement denying involvement. They say they received no confidential Whitaker material and claim Eleanor acted as a private individual seeking whistleblower protection. Marion's eyes narrowed. Whistleblower? That's her shield. Thomas's face hardened. She tried to frame Annie and sell out the company. Now she wants protection. Annie lowered her hand. Can she get away with that? Marion looked at her. Not if we prove she knowingly created a false accusation. Patricia added, the recovered messages help. The threat helps. The anonymous packet helps if we trace it. Caleb's voice suddenly joined through Ethan's laptop. I may have that trace. Thomas leaned closer. What did you find? The anonymous packet sent to Northbridge used a privacy relay. But one embedded screenshot kept original metadata. It was captured on a device named E. Whitaker. iPad. The room went still. Mr. Harris let out a low whistle. Some folks can plan a crime and still forget the small print. Thomas looked at Annie. This moves fast now. Annie nodded, but she was not relieved. Fast meant Eleanor would be cornered sooner, and Annie had already learned what Eleanor did when cornered. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time, there was only one sentence. You should have stayed quiet. Annie stared at the message until the words blurred. You should have stayed quiet. No one in the room reached for her phone this time. They all seemed to understand that the threat had been sent to her, not to Whitaker Global, not to Thomas, not to Northbridge. It belonged to the part of the wound no investigation could fully measure. Marion Brooks held out her hand, palm open. "May I document it?" Annie gave her the phone. Thomas stood very still. "Ethan, preserve the metadata. Patricia, add it to the intimidation file. Marion, what do we do next?" Marion looked at him. "First, stop talking like this is only a company problem. Second, law enforcement gets the threat, the anonymous packet, the recovered messages, and the device metadata. Third, Ms. Carter gets protection from contact. No more waiting for internal procedures to grow a conscience." Thomas nodded. "Do it." Annie looked up. "What does protection mean?" "It means a written no-contact notice today," Marion said. "If Eleanor or anyone acting for her contacts you again, it becomes part of a criminal complaint. It also means you should not travel alone for a few days." Mr. Harris straightened. "I can handle rides." Annie almost protested, but the words died. Pride was useful until it became a locked door. "Thank you." Thomas turned to her. "I can arrange security." "No," Annie said too quickly. He paused. "All right. I don't want men in suits outside my apartment. My neighbors will talk. My mother will worry more." "Then we do it your way," Marion said. "Practical, not theatrical." Patricia's phone buzzed again. But this time it was not bad news. Northbridge signed the written confirmation. "Annie is not considered responsible for the breach." Annie nodded. The sentence should have made her feel free. Instead, she felt tired. A lie could travel in minutes, but clearing a name seemed to require signatures, lawyers, and people deciding how much truth was convenient. Across town, Eleanor Whitaker sat in the back of a private car outside a members-only club near the Battery. She had changed clothes, replacing the cream suit with a charcoal dress and dark glasses. To anyone passing, she looked like a woman waiting for lunch. Inside her handbag, a second phone vibrated against a silk lining. She ignored it once. Then again, on the third call, she answered. "Do not call this number unless necessary." A man's voice came through, clipped and irritated. "It is necessary." Whitaker traced the Northbridge packet. Eleanor looked out at the live oaks bending over the street. "That is impossible. They found metadata." She closed her eyes. For the first time all day, her breathing changed. "How much?" "Enough to connect the screenshot to your tablet. That does not prove who sent it." "No, but it gives them a path. And Haverstone is not going to stand in front of this train for you." Her jaw tightened. "You were happy to accept the information when you thought Thomas would fall. We accepted nothing. That is now our official position." Eleanor laughed once, low and bitter. "Cowards always discover ethics when subpoenas appear." The man's voice hardened. "You told us the girl was manageable." "She was. She is not now." Eleanor looked toward the street, where a mother helped a little boy climb out of a parked car. The boy dropped a toy truck, and the mother bent to pick it up. Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Everyone is manageable if pressure is applied correctly. Do not contact her again." "I have not." "Eleanor." She said nothing. The man exhaled. "If this reaches our board, you are on your own." The call ended. For a moment, Eleanor sat without moving. She had spent most of her life being told indirectly that power should have been hers, then watching Thomas receive it directly. Their father had called Thomas steady, focused, built for leadership. Eleanor had been called impressive, elegant, an asset at dinners. A woman could hear compliments for decades and still understand she was being kept from the chair, but none of that excused what she had done. Somewhere underneath her anger, she knew that. She pushed the knowledge aside. Her driver glanced into the mirror. "Home, Mrs. Whitaker?" "No," she said. "Take me to the office. Mr. Whitaker's security said your access." I said, "Take me to the office." The driver hesitated, then pulled into traffic. At Whitaker Global, Thomas returned to the tower before sunset. The lobby staff stood straighter when he entered, but he barely noticed. He went directly to IT, where Caleb had turned a conference room into a digital evidence lab. Screens showed call maps, access logs, device records, and still frames from elevator cameras. "What do we have?" Thomas asked. Caleb rubbed his eyes. The screenshot sent to Northbridge came from Eleanor's iPad at 3:11 yesterday, 5 minutes after Annie was removed from the boardroom. The packet itself was uploaded through a relay service, but the source file retained device metadata. We also found that Margaret Hale's old account was used to export limited images from the boardroom archive. By Eleanor? By someone using credentials restored through executive operations, but the export happened from her office network. Ethan, standing nearby, said, "Enough for civil action. Combined with the threats and Haverstone contact, enough to refer for criminal investigation." Thomas looked at the screen showing Annie in the boardroom, cropped at the worst possible moment. Her hands were on the folder, her face pale. The room turned against her. Whoever had selected that image understood cruelty. "Delete nothing," Thomas said. Caleb looked offended. "I wouldn't. I know. I said it for myself." Ethan's phone rang. He answered, listened, then stepped closer to Thomas. "Security desk says Eleanor is in the lobby." Thomas turned. Ethan covered the phone. "Her access is suspended. They have not let her pass the gates." Thomas's face hardened. "Keep her there. I'm coming down." By the time Thomas reached the lobby, staff had gathered at careful distances. Eleanor stood near the security gates with her sunglasses in one hand, and fury held behind a public smile. "Thomas," she said, "this is unnecessary. Your access is suspended. To the company our family built. To the company you tried to damage." Her smile thinned. "You are making a mistake. I made one yesterday. I am correcting it today." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think that girl cares about this company? She will take your guilt, your money, and whatever public sympathy she can get. People like her survive by taking advantage of people like you." Thomas looked at his sister for a long moment. "No, Eleanor. People like her survive people like us." The words stopped her. Around them, the lobby quieted. Eleanor recovered with a sharp breath. "You always were sentimental when you wanted to feel noble, and you always called decency sentiment because it cost you nothing to be cruel." Her face changed then, not into shame, but into something more dangerous. "Do not speak to me as if you are better than I am. I am not trying to be better than you. I am trying to be honest about what you did." "What I did?" she snapped. "I tried to save this company from your vanity. Northbridge would have chained us to terms you were too proud to renegotiate. You gave information to Haverstone. I explored leverage. You framed an 18-year-old employee. She was convenient." The word left her mouth before she dressed it. Thomas went still. So did everyone close enough to hear. Eleanor realized it a second too late. Thomas spoke quietly. "Thank you for finally saying the truth out loud." She looked around and saw phones lowered quickly, faces turning away, security guards watching. Her control cracked. "You cannot prove intent from one word." "No," Thomas said. "But I can prove it from messages, metadata, access logs, recovered files, and now a lobby full of witnesses." Ethan arrived beside him. "Mrs. Whitaker, you have been formally notified through counsel not to contact Annie Carter, directly or indirectly. Any further contact will be referred to law enforcement as intimidation." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "She is enjoying this, isn't she?" Thomas's voice sharpened. "You will not say her name like that again in this building." For the first time, Eleanor looked uncertain. Not afraid of law. Not yet. Afraid of losing the one thing she had always trusted. The room. Security escorted her out through the front doors. She did not struggle. That would have been beneath the image she still tried to hold. But every person in the lobby saw her leave without anyone opening the door for her. That night, Annie sat beside her mother watching an old game show with the volume low when Patricia called. "She came to the office," Patricia said. "She admitted enough in the lobby to help the case." Annie closed her eyes. "Did she say why?" "She said you were convenient." The word landed, but not as hard as Annie expected. Maybe because she had already known. Maybe because hearing it confirmed meant she could stop wondering whether she had somehow caused the cruelty aimed at her. Denise reached for her hand. Annie said into the phone, "Then make sure the report says my name too. Not employee, not temp. My name." Patricia's voice softened. "It will." After the call, Denise squeezed her fingers. "You all right?" Annie looked at the television. where strangers clapped for a woman who had guessed the right price of a washing machine. "No," she said, "but I'm less confused." "That counts." Annie leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, careful not to put too much weight there. Across the city, Thomas stood alone in the lobby after most people had gone. The security gates gleamed under the lights, the same gates Annie had walked through every morning with a temporary badge and no protection except her own good conduct. Mr. Harris came by with his jacket over one arm. "Long day, sir." "Yes." "Learn anything?" Thomas looked at him. That justice should not require someone powerful to feel embarrassed first. Mr. Harris nodded. "That's a start." Thomas watched the old man walk toward the doors. A start was not enough, but it was something he could build from, if he meant it when no one was watching. The next morning, the boardroom no longer felt like a place where Annie had been accused. It felt like a place waiting to be judged. Thomas had ordered the long table cleared of flowers, coffee service, and silver trays. No polished distraction. Only folders, screens, legal pads, and the people who now had to answer for what they had allowed. Annie sat beside Patricia Lyle, not at the edge of the room. Mr. Harris sat behind her, close enough that she could hear him unwrap a peppermint from his pocket. Denise had wanted to come, but Annie asked her to rest. "I need to do this standing on my own feet," she had said. Her mother had nodded and fixed the collar of her blouse, as if Annie were leaving for her first day of school. Thomas entered with Ethan Cole and Marion Brooks. He did not sit at the head right away. He looked once at Annie, then at the empty chair where Eleanor used to place her handbag as if saving a throne. "Thank you for coming," he said. Judith Bell, the senior board member, folded her hands. "Let us be clear. We are not here to protect reputations. We are here to establish facts." Marion opened her file. "Then I'll begin." She spoke without decoration. Eleanor Whitaker had used a former assistant's badge, accessed restricted storage, triggered a scheduled camera outage through an old terminal, removed a sealed file from Thomas's office, handed it to Annie Carter, then circulated a cropped image to Northbridge Medical to support a false theft claim. Recovered messages showed prior intent. A company phone tied to Eleanor's office contained communications with a consultant connected to Haverstone Biotech. Metadata linked the Northbridge packet to Eleanor's iPad. Witnesses heard Eleanor describe Annie as convenient. No one interrupted. Annie kept her eyes on the table. Hearing the whole thing in order made it worse and better at the same time. Worse because the cruelty was no accident. Better because truth had a shape now. A board member named Franklin Pierce leaned back. "Do we know Haverstone authorized this?" Ethan answered. "Not yet. They deny involvement, but they received contact from Eleanor and benefited from the attempted delay." "Benefited is not the same as conspired," Franklin said. Marion looked at him. "Correct. That is why the referral separates confirmed conduct from ongoing inquiry." Judith turned to Thomas. "And your recommendation?" Thomas stood. "Immediate removal of Eleanor Whitaker from all board privileges and advisory roles. Preservation of all communications. Referral to law enforcement and regulatory counsel. Written notice to Northbridge with complete evidence summary. Formal written clearance and apology to Annie Carter. Company-wide reform of temporary staffing authority. Complaint channels. And executive access." Franklin tapped his pen. "You understand this will become public." "Yes. It may damage the stock price." "Possibly. It may invite litigation." "Probably." Franklin looked at Annie, then back at Thomas. "And if settling quietly would cost less?" The room tightened. Annie felt Patricia shift beside her. Thomas's voice remained even. "Cost less for whom?" Franklin said nothing. Thomas placed both hands on the table. "We are not buying silence from a young woman my family harmed. We are not hiding betrayal because disclosure is expensive. This company will pay what truth costs." Mr. Harris murmured. "About time somebody put that in a budget." A few people heard him. Nobody corrected him. Judith looked toward Annie. "Miss Carter, you are not required to speak, but if you wish to, this board will hear you." Annie had not planned to. She had told herself Patricia could handle it, Marion could prove it, Thomas could apologize. But Franklin's question still hung in the air. Settling quietly would cost less. Less for them, not for her. She stood slowly. "I came here as temporary staff," she said. "I knew that meant I could be replaced. I did not know it meant I could be used." Yesterday, when the file was in my hands, most people in this room did not ask what power I had. They looked at my badge, my age, my bills, my mother's illness, and decided those things made guilt easier to believe. No one moved. Annie continued, her voice soft but steady. I do not want to be turned into a company lesson while everyone keeps doing the same things next month. I want my name cleared. I want the people who helped tell the truth protected. I want temporary employees to know who they can say no to. And I want no one else in this building to be told their job is to be quiet. Thomas lowered his eyes at that last sentence. Judith nodded. That is now part of the record. Franklin looked uncomfortable. Miss Carter, I regret what happened. Annie looked at him. Regret is what people feel after harm. Repair is what they do next. The words settled across the table with more force than she expected. Mr. Harris stopped unwrapping his peppermint. Judith closed her folder. Then we vote. The vote was not unanimous at first. Franklin hesitated. Another member asked whether law enforcement referral could wait until Northbridge confirmed its position. Judith let them speak, then repeated Marion's timeline from memory and asked each person whether they wanted their objection attached to the record. That ended the hesitation. The motion passed. Eleanor Whitaker was removed. Her shares still existed. Her last name still existed. Her lawyers would come. Her version of the truth would probably find microphones. But inside Whitaker Global, her authority ended at 10:42 a.m. on a Thursday, in the same room where she had tried to bury Annie. After the vote, Thomas turned to Annie. The board has approved full tuition support, medical grant assistance for your household, and an official trainee position with benefits if you choose to accept. You have time to decide. Nothing is conditioned on your silence. Annie nodded. I want the clearance letter first. You'll have it today. And I want Mrs. Alvarez included in training, not punished for being afraid. Thomas looked surprised. She failed you. Yes, Annie said. But fear made her quiet. Eleanor made her cruel. Those aren't the same. Marion watched Annie closely, as if noting something beyond the investigation. Judith said, that distinction is wise. No, Annie said. It's just true. By early afternoon, the official letters were drafted. Northbridge received the evidence summary. The police report was filed with Marion's support. Patricia personally handed Annie a printed clearance statement on company letterhead. Annie read every line twice. Annie Carter did not steal, copy, transmit, or knowingly possess confidential materials for any improper purpose. The accusation against her was false. She held the paper carefully. It weighed almost nothing. Still, it felt heavier than the black folder had, because this time the weight belonged to her name being returned. Thomas stood a few feet away. May I say something? Annie looked up. Yes, I cannot undo what happened in this room. No, but I can make sure this room remembers it correctly. He turned toward the board members still present, toward Ethan, Patricia, Caleb, Mrs. Alvarez near the door, and Mr. Harris by the wall. Yesterday I asked Annie who sent her to steal. Today the record will show she was sent to work, and someone else stole her safety, her dignity, and almost her future. That will not be hidden. Mrs. Alvarez wiped her eyes. Caleb looked down at his laptop. Mr. Harris nodded once. Annie did not cry. She thought she might, but instead she folded the clearance letter and placed it in her backpack, beside her notebook. Outside the boardroom, employees had gathered in small groups. No one clapped. Annie was grateful for that. Applause would have made pain into performance. Instead, people stepped aside as she passed, not with the old indifference, and not with pity. With room, Mrs. Alvarez approached near the elevators. Annie, I'm sorry. I know. I'll do better. Annie looked at her. That matters more. The elevator doors opened. Mr. Harris joined her inside. Lunch? He asked. Annie gave him a tired look. You always think food fixes things. No, but it helps people stay upright while they fix things. This time, Annie smiled. As the elevator descended, she touched the folded letter in her backpack. Her name was safe for now. Her future was not fixed, but it was open again. And above her, in a glass boardroom that had nearly swallowed her whole, the people who once looked away were still sitting with the truth. That was not justice finished. but it was Justice finally refusing to whisper. Lunch was supposed to be simple. Mr. Harris took Annie to a small diner 3 blocks from Whitaker Global. The kind of place with vinyl booths, sweet tea strong enough to make your teeth ache, and waitresses who called everyone honey without making it sound small. Annie ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup because it was the first thing she saw on the menu, and her mind was too tired to choose. Mr. Harris ordered meatloaf, collard greens, and black coffee. "You eat like you're preparing for winter," Annie said. "I'm 70% memory and 30% gravy at this age." She smiled, then looked out the window at the traffic sliding past. The clearance letter was in her backpack. She had checked twice, maybe 3 times. It should have made her feel lighter, but the day had left a strange space inside her, like a room after furniture had been moved. The danger was no longer standing in front of her, yet her body had not received the news. Mr. Harris stirred sugar into his coffee. "You keep touching that backpack. I just want to make sure it's there." "It's there. I know." Knowing and feeling are cousins, not twins. Annie looked at him. "Do you always talk like that?" "Only when meatloaf is coming." The waitress brought their food. Annie dipped the sandwich into the soup and took 1 bite. It tasted like childhood in a way that surprised her. Warm bread, butter, tomato. For a few minutes, neither of them talked. Then the television above the counter changed everything. A local business segment appeared on the noon news. Whitaker Global's logo filled the screen, followed by a headline, "Family Dispute Raises Questions Around Northbridge Deal." Annie stopped chewing. The anchor spoke in the careful voice used when legal departments had approved every word. Sources close to the matter claimed Eleanor Whitaker had been removed from her company role after an internal dispute involving confidential documents. Haverstone Biotech denied wrongdoing. Northbridge Medical had paused review pending additional information. Then came a sentence that made Annie's stomach close. An unnamed temporary employee was initially questioned. Mr. Harris turned in his seat. "Lord have mercy." The waitress lowered the coffee pot. "Isn't that where you work?" Annie did not answer. The woman saw her face and stepped away without asking more. The report did not name Annie, but it did not have to. In buildings like Whitaker Global, unnamed could still point a finger. Temporary employee. Confidential documents. Questioned, those words would travel through break rooms faster than any official letter. Mr. Harris reached for the remote at the counter and turned the volume down. "I thought they cleared me," Annie said. "They did. Then why does it still sound like I did something?" "Because news likes smoke better than water." Annie pushed the plate away. Her phone buzzed. Then again, Mrs. Alvarez, Patricia, an unknown number. She ignored all 3 until Patricia called a second time. "Annie," Patricia said when she answered. "I'm sorry. We did not release that framing, but someone did." "Yes, we're working on it. Your name has not been released. It doesn't matter if everyone can guess." There was a pause. "You're right." Annie closed her eyes. She was tired of people telling her she was right after damage had already happened. Patricia continued. "Mr. Whitaker is preparing a statement. He wants your consent before saying anything that relates to you." "What statement?" "That the employee initially questioned has been fully cleared and was the target of a false accusation." Annie looked at the TV, where Thomas's old press photo appeared beside Eleanor's. "Will that make it worse? It may create a tension. It may also stop the wrong story from hardening." Mr. Harris watched her but said nothing. Annie asked, "Can he say it without my name?" "Yes." "Then say it. I'll tell him." Annie hung up and placed the phone face down. Across the city, Eleanor sat in her attorney's office, watching the same report with dry satisfaction. Her lawyer, Martin Greer, stood by the window with his arms crossed. "You leaked that," he said. "I corrected the narrative. You exposed yourself to further claims. I exposed Thomas to uncertainty." Martin turned. "You are not listening. The board has removed you. The company has evidence. Haverstone is distancing itself. The more you speak, the worse this becomes." Eleanor looked at him calmly. "Worse for whom?" "For you." She smiled. "Martin, I have watched men make disasters and call them strategy my entire life. Do not ask me to panic, because I learned the language. This is not strategy. It is retaliation. It is survival. No, survival is what that young woman was doing. This is pride. The words struck her harder than he expected. Her eyes cooled. "You forget who pays you." "No," Martin said. "I'm trying to keep that person out of prison." Eleanor stood, taking her handbag. "Then do your job better." At Whitaker Global, Thomas recorded the statement himself. No public relations polish. No legal fog beyond what Ethan required. He stood in the lobby, not the boardroom, because that was where employees entered. Caleb set up a single company camera. Patricia reviewed the final wording. Ethan stood nearby, tense but silent. Thomas looked into the lens. Yesterday, a temporary employee of Whitaker Global was falsely accused of mishandling confidential company materials. That employee has been fully cleared. Evidence shows she was deliberately targeted as part of a broader attempt to interfere with company business. I was present when the accusation was made. I accepted assumptions too quickly, and I regret that. Whitaker Global will cooperate with all investigations, protect the employee's privacy, and change the systems that allowed this to happen. No employee's worth is temporary. No person's dignity should depend on their title. Caleb lowered the camera. Patricia blinked once, then looked down at her notes. Ethan said, "Legal will hate the part where you admit regret." "Good," Thomas said. "It means it's human." The statement went out at 2:15 p.m. By 2:40, Northbridge confirmed continued review. By 3:10, Haverstone announced an internal inquiry into unauthorized contact. By 3:30, Whitaker Global employees had watched the video thousands of times. Annie watched it on Patricia's phone in the diner parking lot because she could not bring herself to open it on her own. When Thomas said, "No employee's worth is temporary," she looked away. Mr. Harris stood beside the truck. "You all right?" "I don't know." "That sentence hit something?" She nodded. "I wanted to believe it before today. I just didn't think anyone up there did. Some didn't. Some do now. Some will pretend they always did. That makes me angry." "Good. Anger tells you where the bruise is." Annie handed Patricia's phone back. "Thank you for showing me." Patricia nodded. "You don't have to respond publicly." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." Then Annie's own phone rang. Trident Community College. She almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. "Miss Carter?" a woman said. "This is Elaine Porter from Student Accounts. I'm calling regarding your registration hold." Annie braced herself. "Yes, ma'am. We received notice of a scholarship trust payment pending verification. I wanted to confirm your mailing address and let you know your account is being reviewed for reinstatement eligibility." Annie gripped the phone. "Reinstatement? For the upcoming term, if you choose to return. If you choose. Not if you can pay. Not if you can beg. If you choose." "Yes," Annie said, but her voice came out thin. She cleared her throat. "Yes, ma'am. I want to return." After the call, she stood still beside the truck, staring at nothing. Mr. Harris smiled without showing teeth. "That sounded like news. They're reviewing my school account." "Good. I might go back." "No might. You said you want to." Annie pressed her hand to her mouth. The tears came then, not from fear this time, but from a door reopening so quietly, she almost did not trust it. Mr. Harris looked toward the street and gave her privacy the old-fashioned way, by pretending to be very interested in traffic. That evening, Annie brought the clearance letter and the school news home to Denise. Her mother sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of soup, listening without interrupting. When Annie finished, Denise took both her hands. "You remember what your grandmother used to say?" Annie smiled faintly. "Which thing?" "She said everything like it belonged on a wall." Denise's eyes warmed. "She said, 'Don't let hard years convince you they are the whole story.'" Annie looked down. "I'm scared to hope." "I know. What if something else happens?" "Something else always happens. Hope is not a promise that trouble is done. It's the decision that trouble doesn't get the last word." Annie leaned into her mother's shoulder and let that settle. Across town, Thomas sat alone in his office when Ethan entered with the latest update. "Haverstone's counsel wants distance from Eleanor. They may cooperate." "Northbridge?" "Still cautious, but your statement helped." "And Annie?" Ethan's expression softened. Trident called her. "The education fund is moving." Thomas nodded, but he did not smile. "Good." Ethan placed another folder on the desk. "There is one complication. Eleanor filed an emergency petition through her attorney, claiming the board removal was retaliatory and that she acted as an internal whistleblower. Thomas leaned back, exhausted. Of course she did. She is demanding access to certain records and trying to freeze the board action. Can she? Temporarily, maybe. Permanently? Unlikely. But it means one more fight. Thomas looked at the city beyond the glass. Then we fight it clean. Ethan paused. She may try to drag Annie into it. Thomas's face hardened. No, you may not be able to stop her from trying. Thomas looked at the temporary badge still on his desk, placed beside his note. Start by listening. Then we make sure Annie has counsel of her own, he said. Paid by us if she accepts. Chosen by her. Ethan nodded. That is the right thing. Thomas looked up. Then why does it feel late? Because it is. The honesty hurt, but Thomas preferred it now. That night, Annie opened her notebook and wrote a third line beneath the others. I can be afraid and still choose my future. She paused, then added one more. Justice that arrives late still has work to do. She closed the notebook and placed it beside the clearance letter. For the first time in many months, she set her alarm not only for work, not only for medicine, not only for survival. She set it to call the college in the morning. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, not in a courthouse but in a private arbitration room downtown. The kind of place built to make conflict look expensive and controlled. Annie arrived with Mr. Harris and Denise, who had insisted on coming despite Annie's worry. I sat through worse pain than a conference chair, Denise said. Don't start mothering me before breakfast. Annie did not argue. She had learned that her mother's strength came with limits, but also with pride. Taking either lightly would be disrespectful. Thomas had arranged independent counsel for Annie, but she had chosen the attorney herself. Her name was Grace Holloway, a civil rights lawyer in her 60s who wore a navy suit, flat shoes, and no expression she did not mean. She shook Annie's hand in the lobby and said, My job is not to make you look grateful. My job is to protect your name. Annie liked her immediately. Inside the room, Eleanor sat beside Martin Greer with her hands folded, dressed in dark green and calm enough to fool anyone who had not seen her cornered. She did not look at Annie at first. She looked at Thomas, as if the rest of them were furniture placed badly around an old family argument. The arbitrator, Judge Helen Ross, retired, reviewed the filings with reading glasses low on her nose. Mrs. Whitaker claims the board acted improperly, that her removal was retaliatory, and that she raised legitimate concerns regarding document security. Mr. Whitaker and the company dispute that claim and allege misconduct, including false accusation, unauthorized access, and interference with business negotiations. Miss Carter is present with counsel because her name and employment status are central to the matter. Grace spoke before anyone else could shape it. Miss Carter is not central by choice, Judge. She was made central by Mrs. Whitaker's actions. Judge Ross nodded. Noted. Martin Greer began carefully. My client had concerns about confidentiality around the Northbridge deal. She observed irregular staff movement, including Miss Carter in restricted areas. In the urgency of the moment, mistakes may have been made. But those mistakes do not justify stripping a founding family member of her rights without full process. Grace leaned back, unimpressed. Ethan Cole slid the evidence packet across the table. Thomas said nothing. Annie noticed that. He was listening first. Judge Ross opened the packet. Messages recovered from a company phone indicate Miss Carter was described as young, desperate, quiet, and perfect. Mr. Greer, how does that fit a good faith security concern? Martin glanced at Eleanor. We contest context. Grace's mouth barely moved. Of course you do. Eleanor finally looked at Annie. You have gained quite a team. Annie felt her mother stiffen beside her. Grace placed one finger on the table, a quiet signal. Wait. Judge Ross looked over her glasses. Mrs. Whitaker, you will address counsel, not Miss Carter. Eleanor smiled faintly. Certainly. The evidence unfolded without the drama Eleanor seemed to expect. The service elevator footage, the torn task list, the old badge, the camera outage, the iPad metadata, the threat messages, the lobby witnesses who heard the word convenient. Each piece by itself might have been argued. Together they formed a wall, When Ethan finished, Judge Ross turned to Eleanor. Did you send or authorize the anonymous packet to Northbridge? No. Did your iPad capture the screenshot included in that packet? I do not personally operate every device assigned to me, Grace spoke. But you personally threatened Miss Carter? Eleanor's eyes hardened. I did not threaten her. Grace lifted a page. You should have stayed quiet. Was that encouragement? Martin objected. Judge Ross allowed the question. Eleanor looked from Grace to Thomas. You are all pretending this girl is the injured party while ignoring the damage to the company. Annie heard the word girl and felt something inside her stand up. Grace turned slightly. Annie, you may speak if you want. Annie stood. Not because she needed to, but because sitting suddenly felt too small. I did not damage the company, she said. I came to work. I followed instructions. I carried what I was told to carry. Then people in power used my life like evidence against me. My mother's illness, my bills, my badge, my quiet. None of those things made me dishonest. They made me easy to blame. Eleanor looked away first. Annie continued. I am not here to take your family's company. I am here because you tried to take my name. The room went still. Judge Ross set down her pen. Thank you, Miss Carter. Thomas looked at Annie, and his face showed the weight of hearing in public what he should have understood sooner. After a short recess, Judge Ross returned with her decision. Eleanor's petition to freeze the board action was denied. Whitaker Global had sufficient evidence to suspend and remove her from active authority pending full investigation. The claim of whistleblower protection did not shield conduct that appeared retaliatory, deceptive, or self-serving. Any further contact with Annie Carter would be documented as potential intimidation. Eleanor's face did not fall. It hardened. Judge Ross added, Mrs. Whitaker, power does not give suspicion the dignity of truth. Be careful what you do next. For the first time all morning, Eleanor had no answer. Outside the arbitration room, Thomas approached Annie, Denise, Mr. Harris, and Grace. He stopped at a respectful distance. Miss Carter, he said, I know you have heard enough apologies. Annie looked at him. Maybe. But not enough changes. He nodded. The board approved the employee protection reforms this morning. Temporary staff will have written task channels. Refusal rights for restricted requests. Anonymous reporting to HR and outside counsel. And access to benefits after 90 days. Mr. Quelsts. Mr. Khan. And IS Life. Withenurings reporting. IHR and outside counsel. Harris agreed to serve on the review committee, provided meetings include lunch. Mr. Harris shrugged. A man has standards. Denise smiled, tired but proud. Thomas handed Annie a sealed envelope. Your final clearance letter, not pending. Final. It also confirms your education fund has been transferred to Trident Community College, and a medical assistance grant has been approved through an independent foundation. You owe the company nothing in exchange. Grace took the envelope first, reviewed the first page, then gave it to Annie. Clean. Annie held it with both hands. Thank you. Thomas shook his head. Repair is not a favor. No, Annie said. But I can still acknowledge it. That answer seemed to move him more than gratitude would have. Eleanor passed them on her way out with Martin beside her. She paused once, looking at Annie as if measuring whether one last cut was worth the cost. Grace shifted forward. Denise lifted her chin. Mr. Harris stood straighter. Thomas said nothing, but he did not move aside. Eleanor walked on. Annie watched her leave, and for the first time, the woman seemed smaller. Not harmless, never harmless, but smaller than the fear she had created. That afternoon, Annie went to Trident Community College with her mother. They sat across from Elaine Porter in student accounts while forms were printed. Holds were removed, and enrollment dates were explained. Denise kept a hand on her purse, sitting upright despite fatigue. Elaine smiled. Your account is cleared, Miss Carter. You can register for the spring term. Annie stared at the screen. So I'm really back? If you choose your classes before Monday, yes. There it was again. If you choose. Annie turned to her mother. Denise's eyes were wet. Don't look at me, Denise said. Pick the classes before somebody changes their mind. Annie laughed, and this time it did not break into tears. By evening, she sat at the kitchen table with course listings spread around her. circling anatomy, English composition, and introduction to patient care. Her mother dozed in the armchair. The apartment smelled of tea and the lemon cleaner Annie used on the counters. Outside, somebody's radio played Old Soul through an open window. Her phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Whitaker. Northbridge has resumed talks. Your name was not included in any public filing. I hope school registration went well. Annie read it twice, then typed back. It did. Thank you for keeping my name out of it. His reply came a minute later. You have the right to decide where your name belongs. Annie set the phone down and opened her notebook. Beneath the lines she had already written, she added another. My name belongs to me. She underlined it once. Across town, Thomas stood in the empty boardroom where the accusation had begun. The chairs were pushed in. The glass reflected the city lights. On the table lay the new policy draft, marked with Patricia's notes and Mr. Harris's handwritten complaint in the margin. Make this readable to folks without law degrees. Thomas smiled faintly. Then he looked at the place where Annie had stood with the folder in her hands. He said aloud to the empty room, never again. It was not a promise the room could keep for him. It was work. Daily, inconvenient, expensive work. But this time, he understood that justice was not proven by one apology or one check. Justice was what changed after the powerful had been embarrassed and the powerless had gone home. And for Annie Carter, home no longer felt like the end of what she could survive. It felt like the beginning of what she could choose. Spring came to Charleston with rain first. It washed the pollen from car windows, darkened the brick sidewalks, and left the city smelling like wet oak and salt from the harbor. Annie Carter began her first week back at Trident Community College, carrying the same old backpack, but it felt different now. The strap was still sewn twice. The front pocket still stuck when she pulled the zipper too fast. Inside were new notebooks, a used anatomy textbook, 2 sharpened pencils, and the final clearance letter folded inside a plastic sleeve. On Monday morning, Denise insisted on making breakfast. Sit down, she said, pointing at the chair. Annie looked at the stove. Mama, you don't have to. I know what I don't have to do. Sit. So Annie sat. Denise made scrambled eggs and toast, moving slower than she used to, but with the same stubborn care. When she set the plate down, she touched Annie's shoulder. First day back, Denise said. Annie smiled. Feel strange. Good strange or scared strange? Both. That means it matters. Annie ate half the eggs, then packed the rest in a container because neither of them wasted food. Before leaving, she paused by the door. Denise stood in her robe, one hand on the frame. You got your letter? Denise asked. Yes, ma'am. Vous passe? Yes, ma'am. Your head up? Annie looked at her. Denise raised her eyebrows. That was not a joke. Annie straightened. Yes, ma'am. The campus was not grand, but to Annie it looked like a second chance made of concrete paths, bulletin boards, and students walking too fast with coffee cups. Some were younger than her. Some were older. A man with gray hair held a nursing textbook under one arm. A woman in scrubs hurried past while talking about childcare. Annie had once thought leaving school meant she had failed. Now, standing outside the health sciences building, she understood that returning also required courage. In her first class, the instructor asked everyone to write their name on a card and one reason they wanted to study health care. Annie stared at the blank card for a long moment. Then she wrote, Annie Carter, because people deserve to be treated like they matter before they have to prove they do. She kept the card turned down until the instructor collected it. At Whitaker Global, change arrived less gently. New policies went into effect with meetings that made some executives impatient. Temporary staff received written task boundaries. Restricted area requests required digital approval. Anonymous complaints went to Patricia's office and an outside ethics line. Mr. Harris sat on the Employee Conduct Review Committee in a short-sleeve shirt and no tie, eating the lunch Thomas had promised. At the first meeting, a senior manager said, Do we really need this much paperwork for simple support tasks? Mr. Harris looked over his glasses. If simple tasks can ruin a young woman's life, maybe they weren't simple. No one argued after that. Thomas did not attend every meeting, but he read every report. He learned things he should have known years earlier. Who was afraid to speak, who gave orders without authority, who smiled at staff without respect behind it. It was not pleasant work. It was not flattering. But for the first time in a long time, the company felt less like a monument and more like a responsibility. Eleanor's legal battle continued in quieter rooms. Haverstone cooperated enough to save itself. Northbridge resumed negotiations after a full compliance review. Eleanor's lawyers tried to soften words like scheme, retaliation, and intimidation into judgment error and family disagreement. Marion Brooks did not let them. Patricia did not let them. Ethan did not let them. Most important, Annie's name stayed protected. One afternoon, 3 weeks into classes, Annie received a letter from Northbridge Medical. It was brief and formal. Signed by Dana Klein. Miss Carter, we regret that your name and image were used in materials sent to our office. Based on evidence reviewed, we recognize that you were falsely implicated and harmed by that action. We wish you success in your studies and future career. Annie read it twice, then placed it behind the clearance letter, not because she needed every apology, because she wanted a record that the lie had lost. By May, Denise's treatment schedule had stabilized through the medical assistance grant. She still had hard days. Some mornings her hands shook too much to button her blouse. Some nights, Annie still counted pills at the kitchen table, but there was less panic in the counting now, less fear hiding behind every envelope. On a warm Thursday evening, Annie came home from class to find Mr. Harris sitting at the kitchen table, eating cornbread Denise had made. You just walk into people's houses now? Annie asked. He pointed at Denise. I was invited. Denise smiled. He brought greens. That does sound legal. Mr. Harris nodded toward her backpack. How's school? Hard. Good. Why does everyone keep saying that? Because easy things don't make nurses. Annie sat down and pulled out a graded quiz. 92. Denise held it like it was a diploma. Mr. Harris pretended to inspect it for fraud. Looks official, he said. No secret folders involved. Annie groaned, but she laughed. The joke no longer hurt the way it once might have. Some wounds did not disappear. They became places where the skin learned weather. 2 months later, Whitaker Global held a small internal ceremony. Not for publicity, but to announce a scholarship fund for hourly and temporary workers pursuing education. Annie had agreed to attend only after Patricia promised there would be no surprise speech, no cameras pointed at her, no story told without her approval. The room was modest, filled with employees from facilities, reception, mail services, cafeteria staff, and administrative support. Thomas stood at the front, holding a single page. This fund exists because our company failed someone who should have been protected by ordinary fairness, he said. We are not naming that person today because her life is not our lesson to display. But we will honor what the truth required from us. The Carter Opportunity Fund will support employees whose work here should never force them to choose between survival and education. Annie sat beside Denise near the back. Her mother squeezed her hand. Mr. Harris leaned over from the next chair. Carter, huh? Annie whispered. I told them they could use the name if it helped somebody. It will. After the ceremony, Thomas approached them carefully. He had learned not to assume access to gratitude. Miss Carter, he said. Mrs. Carter. Denise nodded. Mr. Whitaker. Annie looked toward the employees still talking near the coffee table. People applied already? 23 in the first hour, Thomas said. She absorbed that. 23 people with bills, children, aging parents, second chances waiting behind locked doors. Good, she said. Thomas smiled faintly. Yes. Good. Then he handed her a small envelope. This came from Mrs. Alvarez. She was too emotional to give it to you herself. Inside was a handwritten note. Annie, I used to think keeping my head down was how I kept peace. You taught me that silence can make room for harm. I am learning. Thank you for expecting better from us. Annie folded the note and put it in her bag. That night, back at home, she opened her notebook to the page where she had written the first line after everything happened. I am not temporary. Below it were the others. I do not have to be silent to be safe. I can be afraid and still choose my future. Justice that arrives late still has work to do. My name belongs to me. She picked up her pen and added one final line. My voice matters. Denise looked over from the stove. That for school? No, Annie said. For me. Outside, Rain tapped against the window, soft and steady. Annie sat at the kitchen table in the small apartment above the old dry cleaner, with textbooks open, tea cooling beside her, and her mother humming while washing a cup. Nothing about their life had become easy, but it had become possible again. Across the city, Thomas stood in the lobby of Whitaker Global after most employees had gone home. The security gates were quiet. The blue glass reflected the evening lights. Mr. Sadie, or Thady, R. Com. Harris walked past with his jacket over one shoulder. Heading out, sir? In a minute. Mr. Harris stopped. Still thinking? Always. That can be useful. Long as you eventually do something. Thomas looked at the scholarship announcement on the wall. Do you think it's enough? No. Thomas turned to him. Mr. Harris shrugged. But enough ain't where you start. It's where you keep going. Thomas nodded slowly. Good night, Mr. Harris. Night, sir. When the old man left, Thomas looked once more at the lobby doors. He thought of Annie walking in with her old backpack, unseen until someone needed a scapegoat. He thought of Eleanor leaving through those same doors, stripped not of wealth, but of the unquestioned power she had mistaken for worth. Justice had not arrived like thunder. It had arrived through camera logs, torn paper, a witness who refused to leave, a young woman who found her voice, and a room full of powerful people forced to listen. And somewhere across Charleston, Annie Carter was studying for an anatomy quiz, not because a billionaire had saved her, but because the truth had given back what a lie tried to steal. Her future, her name, her voice. The lesson of Annie's story is simple. Never judge a person by their position, their silence, or their hardship. Desperate circumstances do not make someone dishonest, and power does not make someone truthful. Real justice begins when people stop protecting status and start protecting dignity. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is not weak, they are simply waiting for someone to finally listen. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.